The blizzard stole everything. First his food, then his hope. Now it was coming for his daughter. Jasper Hale pressed his cracked lips together, trying not to breathe in the scent of the broth he'd just fed Clara. 3 days without eating. His stomach had stopped growling and started burning. Outside, Wyoming's merciless winter howled like it wanted in. Inside, his 6-year-old's fever climbed higher. When hoofbeats shattered the silence, he grabbed his rifle with shaking hands. But the stranger at his door wouldn't bring death. She'd bring something far more dangerous. Hope. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far our tale travels across this land. The Winchester felt heavier than it should have in Jasper Hale's hands. 3 days without food would do that to a man. Make his arms feel like they were filled with sand instead of muscle. Make his vision swim at the edges like he was looking through water. He steadied himself against the doorframe of his cabin, one eye pressed to the gap where the door met the wall, watching the rider approach through the curtain of snow. "Papa?" Clara's voice was a whisper from the bed, thin as smoke. "Hush now, baby girl. Just stay quiet for your papa." The rider was small. That registered first. Not the hulking frame of a cattle rustler or one of the Davidson boys coming to collect on debts Jasper couldn't pay. Small, wrapped in furs so thick they made the figure look like a bear on horseback. The horse itself was struggling, a bay mare, good stock from what Jasper could see, but laboring through snow that came up past her knees. Stupid. Riding out in this weather was plain stupid, which meant whoever this was either had a damn good reason or was running from something worse than the storm. Jasper's thumb found the hammer of the Winchester, drew it back with a click that sounded too loud in the cabin's stillness. Behind him, Clara coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made his heart clench like a fist. That cough had started 4 days ago, 4 days that felt like 4 years, watching his little girl burn with fever, listening to her lungs fill with fluid, knowing he was helpless to stop it. The rider dismounted 20 yards from the cabin. Through the blowing snow, Jasper could see them moving, securing the horse, pulling something from the saddlebags. Not a gun. A bag. Leather, by the look of it. Medical bag? "Who are you?" Jasper called through the door, his voice rough from disuse and thirst. He'd been rationing the water, giving Clara most of it. "State your business." The figure turned toward his voice, and even through the storm, Jasper could see the moment they spotted the rifle barrel protruding through the gap in the door. "Mr. Hale?" A woman's voice, clear and strong despite the wind. "Mr. Jasper Hale?" "Depends on who's asking." He kept the rifle steady, though his arms were starting to shake. "And how you know my name?" "My name is Evelyn Carr. Sheriff Morrison sent me." She took a step closer, and Jasper could see her face now, young, maybe 25, with dark hair plastered to her cheeks by the snow. Her eyes were bright, alert, the kind of eyes that saw things. "I'm a healer. The sheriff said you have a sick child." Jasper's finger tensed on the trigger. "Sheriff's got a big mouth." "The sheriff cares about folks in his territory." Another step. She was close enough now that Jasper could see she wasn't armed. At least, not that he could see. Even the ones who are too proud to ask for help. "I didn't ask for anything." "No." Evelyn Carr stopped, standing in snow up to her shins, the wind whipping her furs around her like dark wings. "But your daughter's coughing could be heard 2 farms over when Jake Peterson rode past 3 days ago. He told the sheriff told me, and I came." Jake Peterson should mind his own damn business. "Should I go then?" She didn't move, just stood there meeting his gaze through the storm. Ride back to town and tell the sheriff that Jasper Hale would rather let his pride kill his daughter than accept help from a stranger? The words hit like bullets. Jasper's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Behind him, Clara coughed again, longer this time, deeper, ending in a small whimper that drove straight into his heart like a railroad spike. His hand fell away from the rifle. "You're a doctor?" "Healer." Evelyn's voice softened slightly. "Trained by my grandmother, who learned from the Shoshone. I've treated everything from snakebite to smallpox. Let me see your daughter, Mr. Hale. Please." The please did it. Not because Jasper was moved by politeness, but because he heard something in it. Something that said this woman genuinely gave a damn whether a stranger's child lived or died. In Jasper's experience, that kind of caring was rarer than gold and twice as valuable. He opened the door. The cabin was small, one room, with a loft that Jasper rarely used anymore. The bed where Clara lay took up most of the eastern wall, positioned to catch the morning sun when there was any sun to catch. Now it just caught shadows. The fire in the hearth had burned low, and the cabin was cold enough that Jasper could see his breath. Evelyn stepped inside, and immediately her nose wrinkled. Jasper felt a flash of shame. The cabin smelled of sickness, sweat and fever, and the chamber pot he hadn't had the strength to empty in 2 days. He'd kept Clara clean, kept her in fresh night clothes, but the smell lingered anyway, thick and oppressive. How long has she been like this? Evelyn was already moving toward the bed, shrugging out of her heavy outer furs. Underneath, she wore a simple wool dress, practical and worn, with a leather belt from which hung several small pouches. 4 days. Jasper set the rifle aside, his hands trembling now that the immediate threat was past, or maybe from hunger. Hard to tell. Started with a cough, then the fever came. Any injury, fall, blow to the head? No, nothing like that. Evelyn knelt beside the bed, and Clara's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy with fever, unfocused. Jasper's daughter had his late wife's eyes, gray as storm clouds, but right now they looked like windows into nothing. "Hello, sweetheart." Evelyn's voice changed completely, became soft and warm as summer rain. "My name's Evelyn. I'm a friend of your papa's. Can you tell me your name?" "Clara." The word was barely audible. "That's a beautiful name." Clara means bright. Did you know that? Bright and clear as a bell. Evelyn's hands moved with quick efficiency, pressing against Clara's throat, feeling for swollen glands. "I'm going to touch you a little bit, all right? Just checking to see how you're feeling. You tell me if anything hurts too much." Clara nodded weakly. Jasper watched from near the door, feeling useless and helpless and angry at both. This woman had been in his cabin for less than 2 minutes, and already she was doing more for his daughter than he'd been able to do in 4 days. Evelyn pulled back the blankets carefully. Clara was wearing a nightgown that Jasper had changed this morning, one of 3 she owned, all made by his mother before she'd passed. The fabric was thin, worn soft by washing. Through it, Jasper could see how thin his daughter had become. She'd never been a big child, but now her collarbones stood out like fence posts, and her ribs were visible when she breathed. When did she last eat? Evelyn's hand rested on Clara's forehead, measuring the fever. "Yesterday morning. Little bit of broth." "And before that?" Jasper hesitated. "Day before. She hasn't had much appetite." "I see." Evelyn leaned down, putting her ear close to Clara's chest. "Take a deep breath for me, honey. Big as you can." Clara tried. The breath rattled in her chest like stones in a tin can, wet and thick. Halfway through, she started coughing again, deep, barking coughs that shook her small frame. Evelyn supported her, one hand on her back, waiting until the fit passed. "Lung fever." Evelyn's voice was calm, matter of fact, but Jasper heard the edge underneath. This was serious. "The infection has settled in her lungs. Not pneumonia yet, but it will be if we don't act quickly. Can you help her?" The words came out more desperate than Jasper intended. Evelyn looked up at him, and her eyes were steady, clear, honest. "Yes, if we're not too late. But I'll need to stay, at least through tonight, possibly longer, and I'll need your help." "Anything. First, I need you to stoke that fire until this cabin is warm enough to sweat in. Lung fever thrives in cold. We need heat, steam, moisture in the air." She was already opening her medical bag, pulling out cloth packets and small bottles. "Then I need boiling water, as much as you can manage. After that, you need to sit down before you fall down because you look like death's second cousin." "I'm fine." "You're starving." Evelyn didn't even look at him, just kept sorting through her supplies. "When did you last eat, Mr. Hale?" The silence stretched out. Jasper's jaw worked, but no words came. 3 days? Evelyn guessed. 4? 3, he admitted finally. "I've been giving everything to Clara." Noble, stupid, but noble. Now she did look at him, and there was something fierce in her expression. You can't care for her if you collapse. I need you functional. Understood? Nobody had talked to Jasper Hale like that since his wife died. Part of him wanted to bristle at it. Another part, a bigger part, felt something crack open inside. Some barrier he'd built around himself to keep from feeling how scared he was, how lost. He nodded. Good. Then let's get to work. The next hour passed in a blur of activity that made Jasper's head spin. He built up the fire until the cabin was almost uncomfortably warm, the flames roaring in the hearth and throwing dancing shadows across the walls. He set every pot and pan he owned to boil water until steam filled the air and made the rough wood of the walls glisten with moisture. Evelyn worked with calm efficiency that spoke of long practice. She ground dried herbs in a small mortar. Jasper caught the scent of thyme, sharp and clean, and something else he didn't recognize. She mixed them with honey until the paste was smooth, then added hot water to make a syrup that looked almost black. This will taste terrible, she warned Clara, supporting the child's head with one hand. But it will help your lungs, I promise. Can you be brave for me? Clara nodded weakly. Evelyn brought the spoon to the child's lips, and Clara drank, making a face that would have been comical under other circumstances. Good girl. That's my brave girl. Evelyn stroked Clara's hair, damp with fever sweat. One more spoonful. I know, but this is the medicine that's going to make you well. While Clara swallowed the second dose, Evelyn heated another mixture over the fire, this one made with mustard seed and flax. When it was hot enough, she spread it on a cloth, testing the temperature carefully against her own wrist before laying it across Clara's chest. The poultice will draw out the congestion, she explained to Jasper. We'll change it every 2 hours through the night. The syrup will help her cough be productive instead of just painful. And the steam, she gestured at the humid air, will keep her airways from drying out. Will it be enough? Evelyn met his eyes. I don't know. She's very sick, Mr. Hale. The infection has taken deep root. But she's young, and the young are resilient. We'll fight for her. That's all we can do. It was honest. Jasper appreciated that. He was tired of platitudes, of people saying she'll be fine when they had no idea. At least this woman told him the truth. Now, Evelyn said, standing and brushing her hands on her skirt, let's talk about you. I told you I'm fine. And I told you you're starving. She moved to her saddlebags, which she'd brought inside, and started pulling out supplies. Bread wrapped in cloth, a wedge of yellow cheese, dried beef, an apple, slightly wrinkled but still good. When Clara's sleeping, you're eating, non-negotiable. Jasper's stomach twisted at the sight of the food. His mouth flooded with saliva so suddenly it made him dizzy. 3 days. 3 days since he'd eaten anything more than a few sips of water. I can't. His pride rose up, choking him. I can't take your food. You're not taking it. I'm giving it. Evelyn set the supplies on the table, rough-hewn wood that Jasper had built himself 7 years ago when he'd first claimed this land. And before you argue, understand that I came prepared for this. I packed extra specifically because the sheriff warned me you'd be too stubborn to feed yourself. He said that? He said you were the most pig-headed rancher in 3 counties, and that if your wife were alive, she'd have boxed your ears already for letting yourself waste away. Evelyn's voice softened. He also said she was a good woman, and that you loved her very much. I'm sorry for your loss. The words hit Jasper like a fist to the gut. He turned away, pretending to check the fire, but really just trying to keep Evelyn from seeing his face. 6 years. It had been 6 years since Sarah died, and sometimes it felt like 6 minutes. The grief was always there, waiting, like a wolf in the dark. She died giving birth to Clara, he said finally, because it seemed like Evelyn deserved to know. Bled out. The midwife did everything she could, but Sarah was small and Clara was... His throat closed. I had to choose. The midwife asked me to choose. I told her to save the baby. That must have been an impossible decision. It was the only decision. Jasper's hands curled into fists. Sarah would have wanted it that way. She'd have given her life for Clara without hesitation, but knowing that doesn't make it easier. Knowing that doesn't stop Clara from being the only reason I get up in the morning, and the only reason I feel guilty every single day. Guilty? Evelyn's voice was quiet, careful. For choosing. For letting Sarah die. For being relieved every morning when I see Clara's face instead of an empty cabin. The words were pouring out now, words he'd never said to anyone, barely even admitted to himself. For being terrified every second that I'll lose her too, and then I'll have nothing. No wife, no daughter, no reason to keep breathing. Behind him, he heard Evelyn move. Then her hand was on his shoulder, light, careful, asking permission. Sarah would want you to eat, she said softly. She'd want you to take care of yourself so you could take care of your daughter, and she'd want you to stop punishing yourself for making the choice she would have made herself. Jasper's breath shuddered out of him. You didn't know Sarah. No, but I know mothers. Evelyn's hand squeezed once, gently, then withdrew. And I know that no mother would want her husband to starve himself to death from grief and guilt. So sit down, Mr. Hale. Eat. Let me watch Clara for a while. You're no good to her if you collapse. He wanted to argue. God, how he wanted to argue. But his legs were shaking, and his head was light, and Clara was sleeping now, her breathing a little easier thanks to the medicine. Slowly, feeling like he was betraying something he couldn't name, Jasper sat down at the table. Evelyn put the bread in front of him. The cheese. The dried beef. She poured him water from her own canteen, clean, cold, better than the melted snow he'd been giving Clara. Eat slowly, she instructed. Your stomach will rebel if you eat too fast after days of nothing. Jasper tore off a piece of bread. It was good bread, dense and dark, probably made with rye. He chewed slowly, and the taste exploded across his tongue. Salt and earth and life. His stomach cramped immediately, twisting with hunger and relief in equal measure. Smaller bites, Evelyn said gently. He obeyed. Piece by piece, he ate. The bread, some cheese, a little of the dried beef, though his stomach protested after the third bite, and he had to stop. But it was food, real food, the first he'd had in days. He could feel his body screaming in gratitude, his blood starting to flow warmer in his veins. Evelyn watched him for a moment, then moved back to Clara's bedside. She checked the poultice, adjusted the blankets, wiped the child's face with a damp cloth. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, and snow hissed against the windows. But inside, the cabin was warm. The fire crackled. Clara breathed. Tell me about this land, Evelyn said after a while, still working. How long have you been here? 8 years. Jasper's voice was rough, but stronger now. Food was a miracle. Staked my claim in 1870. Built this cabin with my own hands. Sarah and I, we had plans. We're going to build a bigger house, raise cattle, have more children. He stared into his cup. Funny how life works out different than you plan. It rarely cooperates with our expectations. Evelyn changed the cloth on Clara's forehead for a cooler one. I'm from Philadelphia originally, came west 3 years ago. Long way from home. Philadelphia stopped feeling like home after my grandmother died. She raised me, taught me everything I know about healing. When she passed, I had nothing keeping me there. So I bought a ticket on a westbound train and kept going until I found someplace that felt right. And Wyoming territory felt right. Jasper couldn't keep the skepticism out of his voice. Wyoming was hard country. Beautiful, but hard. It broke people who weren't strong enough to bend. Evelyn smiled, a small curve of her lips. Wyoming felt honest. Back east, everything is covered in pretension and propriety. Out here, things are what they are. People are what they are. I appreciate that. Most folks appreciate it less when they're freezing to death in a blizzard. Most folks lack imagination. She glanced over at him, and her eyes caught the firelight. I like the wildness, the space, the way the sky goes on forever. It reminds me that we're small, and our problems are smaller. Tell that to my daughter. Your daughter's problem is bacteria in her lungs. That's not small to her, but in the grand scheme of things, it's treatable, it's solvable. Evelyn's voice was firm. We will solve it. The confidence in her voice was like a rope thrown to a drowning man. Jasper grabbed it without thinking. You sound very sure. I am sure. I've treated lung fever dozens of times. I know what works. She moved back to her medical bag, pulling out more herbs. But I need to be honest with you, Mr. Hale. The next 24 hours are critical. Claire's fever will get worse before it gets better. Her body is fighting the infection, and that fight takes a toll. She'll need constant care. Fresh poultices every 2 hours, more medicine every 4 hours, cool cloths when the fever spikes, warm broth when she can take it. It's going to be a long night. I've handled long nights before. Not alone you haven't. Not when you're half-starved and exhausted yourself. Evelyn measured dried leaves into her palm, her movements precise. That's why I'm staying. Between the two of us, we can keep watch. One sleeps while the other monitors Clara. We take turns. That way, neither of us misses something crucial. Jasper wanted to argue, wanted to say he didn't need help, that he could handle this himself, that he'd been handling everything himself for 6 years and he was fine. But he wasn't fine. He was exhausted and scared and so far past his limits that he couldn't even see them anymore. And Clara needed more than what he alone could give. All right, he said finally, you stay. Good. Evelyn smiled, quick and bright, like sun breaking through clouds. Then we have a plan. You finish eating, then you're sleeping for 3 hours while I watch Clara. After that, we'll switch. Agreed? Agreed. Outside, the blizzard intensified. Jasper could hear it in the way the wind shrieked, in the way the cabin's walls creaked under the strain. This was going to be a bad one, the kind of storm that killed cattle and buried roads and left homesteads isolated for days. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. The air felt different, warmer, yes, but also more alive. Less like a place where people waited to die and more like a place where they fought to live. Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring something Jasper couldn't make out. Evelyn was at her side immediately, one cool hand on the child's forehead, the other stroking her hair. Shh, sweetheart. You're safe. Your papa's here, and I'm here too. We're going to take care of you. And watching this stranger, this healer who'd ridden through a blizzard to help a child she'd never met, Jasper felt something he hadn't felt in 6 long years. He felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to make it through this after all. Jasper woke to the sound of Clara coughing. For a moment, disoriented by exhaustion and the unfamiliar feeling of having slept deeply, he couldn't place where he was. Then reality crashed back. The cabin, the storm, his daughter's illness, and Evelyn. He sat up too quickly, and his head swam. The loft where he'd collapsed 3 hours ago was warm, almost stifling, and through the floorboards he could see firelight dancing. Below, Evelyn moved with quiet efficiency, her shadow stretching long across the walls. Easy now, Clara. I've got you. Her voice drifted up, soft and soothing. That's it. Cough it up if you need to. Don't fight it. Jasper climbed down the ladder, his muscles protesting every movement. 3 hours of sleep felt like 3 minutes, but it was more than he'd gotten in the past 4 days combined. His head was clear, at least. The fog that had been clouding his thoughts had lifted slightly. Evelyn glanced up as he reached the bottom. You're supposed to sleep longer. Heard Clara coughing. Her fever spiked about 20 minutes ago. I've been keeping cool cloths on her forehead and neck. Evelyn wrung out a fresh cloth from a basin of snowmelt water. The coughing is actually a good sign. Means the medicine is working, loosening the congestion in her lungs. Jasper moved to his daughter's bedside. In the firelight, Clara's face was flushed bright red, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. But her eyes were open, aware, tracking his movement as he knelt beside the bed. Papa. Her voice was a rasp, but it was there, stronger than it had been that morning. I'm here, baby girl. He took her small hand in his, felt how hot it was, like holding a coal fresh from the fire. How do you feel? Tired, and my chest hurts. I know, but Miss Evelyn says the medicine is helping. You just need to be brave a little while longer. I'm trying. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I'm trying to be brave like Mama would want. The words drove straight into Jasper's heart like an arrow. He had to look away, had to blink hard against the sudden burning in his own eyes. 6 years old, and Clara was already trying to live up to a mother she'd never known, a ghost made of stories and faded photographs. Your mama would be so proud of you. His voice cracked on the words. You're the bravest person I know. Evelyn placed a fresh poultice on Clara's chest, and the child winced at the heat. I know it's uncomfortable, sweetheart, but this is going to help draw out all the bad stuff in your lungs. Can you be strong for just a few more hours? Clara nodded, fresh tears sliding down her temples. Jasper wiped them away with his thumb, his own throat too tight to speak. "Tell you what," Evelyn said, settling herself on the edge of the bed. "How about I tell you a story while the medicine works? Would you like that?" "What kind of story?" Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "A true story. About the bravest girl I ever knew." Evelyn's hands moved automatically, checking Clara's pulse at her wrist, monitoring her breathing, but her voice took on the cadence of a storyteller, warm and rich. "Her name was Little Bird, and she was a Shoshone girl about your age. She lived with her grandmother, who was also my grandmother, which made Little Bird and me almost like sisters." Jasper found himself leaning in despite himself, drawn by the gentle rhythm of Evelyn's voice. Outside, the wind continued its assault on the cabin, but inside a kind of peace had settled over them. "Little Bird got very sick one winter, just like you. The fever came fast and hard, and her lungs filled up with fluid until she could barely breathe. Everyone in the village thought she would die, everyone except her grandmother, who was the greatest healer in 3 territories. Evelyn smoothed Clara's hair back from her forehead. "Do you know what her grandmother did?" Clara shook her head slightly. "She stayed up for 3 days and 3 nights, never sleeping, never leaving Little Bird's side. She made medicines from herbs and roots. She sang healing songs. She prayed to the spirits of the mountains, and most importantly, she talked to Little Bird. She told her stories about all the things they would do together when Little Bird was well again, about the horses they would ride and the rivers they would swim in and the mountains they would climb." "Did it work?" Clara's eyes were fixed on Evelyn's face. "Little Bird got better. Not right away. It took time, and there were moments when everyone thought she wouldn't make it. But slowly, day by day, the fever broke. Her lungs cleared. And by the time spring came, she was running through the meadows again, stronger than ever." Evelyn smiled. "I know this because Little Bird grew up to teach me everything her grandmother had taught her. She became a healer too, and she saved many lives in her time." "Is she still alive?" Clara asked. Something passed across Evelyn's face, grief, quick and sharp, before she smoothed it away. "No, sweetheart. She passed away 2 years ago. But before she died, she made me promise something. She made me promise that I would use everything she taught me to help people, especially children. That I would never turn away from someone who needed healing, no matter how far I had to travel or how dangerous the journey." Evelyn's eyes met Jasper's over Clara's head. "That's why I came here tonight, because Little Bird would have come, and I promised her I would carry on her work." The cabin fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind. Jasper felt something shift in his chest, some hard knot of fear and resentment beginning to loosen. This woman hadn't come out of pity or obligation. She'd come because she'd made a promise to someone she loved, and she kept her promises. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for telling her that story, and for being here." Evelyn nodded, then stood. "Clara needs to try to drink something, even just a few sips of broth. Can you support her head while I get some warmed?" They worked together in the close confines of the cabin, moving around each other with surprising ease. Jasper held Clara while Evelyn warmed beef broth over the fire, tasting it to make sure the temperature was right before bringing it over. Together they coaxed Clara to take 3 spoonfuls. Not much, but enough to count as progress. "That's my girl," Jasper murmured as Clara's eyes began to droop again. "You rest now. We'll be right here." Within minutes, Clara had drifted back into fevered sleep. Her breathing was still rough, still wet with congestion, but perhaps slightly easier than before. Or maybe Jasper was just desperate to see improvement. "You should eat something too," Evelyn said, moving back to the table where the remains of the bread and cheese still sat. "Keep your strength up. I'm all right for now." But his stomach betrayed him with a low growl, and Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Your body disagrees. Come on, we have time before the next medicine dose." Jasper sat, and Evelyn pushed the bread toward him. This time, he took it without argument. His pride had taken enough of a beating in the past 12 hours that he was starting to realize it had been getting in the way of survival. "Tell me about your wife," Evelyn said, settling into the chair across from him. "What was she like?" Jasper paused mid-bite. "Why do you want to know?" "Because Clara mentioned her, and I can see how much it pains you both to talk about her. But sometimes," Evelyn's voice was gentle, careful. "Sometimes keeping grief locked up tight does more harm than good. It festers, like an infected wound. Better to open it up, clean it out, let it heal properly. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. Evelyn's gaze drifted to the fire. I lost someone too. Someone I thought I'd spend my life with. It's not the same as losing a wife, but I understand what it's like to have a hole in your life shaped like a person who's gone. Jasper chewed slowly, considering. He'd spent 6 years avoiding conversations about Sarah, changing the subject when people brought her up, keeping his grief private, locked away where it couldn't hurt anyone else. But sitting here in the warm cabin with the storm raging outside and his daughter finally resting easier, something in him wanted to talk. Sarah was small, he said finally, barely came up to my shoulder, but she was fierce, had opinions about everything and wasn't afraid to share them. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. First time I met her, she was arguing with a shopkeeper in St. Louis about the price of flour. She had the man so flustered he finally just gave her the price she wanted. Evelyn smiled. Sounds formidable. She was, but she was also kind. Used to feed every stray animal that wandered onto our property. We had 3 dogs, 2 cats, and a raccoon that she'd tamed enough to eat out of her hand. Jasper's throat tightened. She wanted a big family. 6 kids, she used to say, enough to fill a house with noise and laughter. She was so excited when she got pregnant with Clara. Used to talk to her belly all the time, telling the baby about all the things they'd do together. The midwife said you had to choose. Evelyn's voice was quiet. That must have been impossible. It wasn't a choice. Jasper set down the bread, his appetite suddenly gone. Not really. Sarah was bleeding out, and the baby was stuck. The midwife said she could try to save Sarah, but the baby would die. Or she could save the baby, but Sarah would... He couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah grabbed my hand. She was so weak she could barely speak, but she looked at me and said, "Save our baby. Promise me." So I promised. And you've been living with that promise ever since. I've been living with the fact that my wife died because of a choice I made. Every time I look at Clara, I see Sarah's eyes looking back at me. Every time Clara laughs, I hear Sarah's laugh. And every time Clara gets sick, his voice broke. Every time she gets sick, I'm terrified that I'm going to lose her too. And then what will it all have been for? What will Sarah's death have meant if Clara dies anyway? Evelyn reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her palm was warm, calloused from work. It will have meant that you loved them both enough to make the hardest decision a man can make. It will have meant that Sarah's love lives on in Clara, and it will have meant that for 6 years you gave that little girl a father who cares for her so deeply he'd starve himself to feed her. I don't feel like a good father. The words came out raw, stripped of pretense. I feel like I'm failing her every day. I can't give her the life Sarah would have wanted. I can't give her a mother. I can't even keep her from getting sick. No parent can keep their child from ever getting sick. That's not how life works. Evelyn's grip on his hand tightened. But you got her through 4 days of fever before I arrived. You kept her alive, Jasper. That's not nothing. The use of his first name, simple, direct, without the formal Mr. Hale, felt intimate somehow, like they'd crossed some invisible line from strangers to something else. Not friends, exactly. Not yet, but maybe the beginning of friendship. I couldn't have done it much longer, Jasper admitted. Another day, maybe 2, and I would have... He couldn't finish that sentence either. But you didn't have to, because you're not alone anymore. Evelyn released his hand and stood, moving back to check on Clara. At least not tonight. Tonight, you have help. The next hours blurred together in a rhythm of care and watchfulness. They took turns monitoring Clara, changing her poultices, coaxing medicine down her throat when she woke enough to swallow. The fever continued to spike and fall in waves, leaving Clara drenched in sweat one moment and shivering the next. Around 2 in the morning, Clara woke crying. Not the weak, whimpering cries of before, but full-throated sobs that sounded almost healthy in their strength. "I want Mama," she wailed as Jasper tried to soothe her. "I want Mama, Papa, where's Mama?" The words were knives. Jasper held his daughter close, feeling her heart race against his chest. "Mama's not here, baby, but I'm here, and Miss Evelyn is here. But I want Mama. I had a dream about her. She was here, and she was singing to me, and then she went away and I couldn't find her." Clara's tears soaked through Jasper's shirt. Why did she go away? Jasper looked helplessly at Evelyn, who had moved closer. She touched his shoulder lightly, then knelt beside the bed so she was at Clara's eye level. "Sweetheart, your mama didn't want to go away," Evelyn said gently. "She loved you so much, but sometimes people get sick and their bodies can't fight anymore. It's not anyone's fault. It just happens." "But I never got to meet her." Clara's voice was thick with tears and congestion. "Papa has pictures, but I don't remember her at all. I don't know what her voice sounded like or what she smelled like or anything." Evelyn glanced at Jasper, a question in her eyes. He nodded slowly, giving permission for something he didn't quite understand yet. "Then maybe your papa can tell you," Evelyn said. "Maybe he can tell you about your mama right now while we're all here together. Would you like that?" Clara nodded against Jasper's chest, and he felt his heart clench. He'd avoided this for so long, avoided talking about Sarah in detail because it hurt too much, because he was afraid he'd break down in front of his daughter and scare her. But looking down at Clara's fevered face, her eyes red from crying, he realized that his silence had been hurting her too. "All right," he said, his voice rough. "What do you want to know?" "What did Mama's voice sound like?" Jasper closed his eyes, reaching back through 6 years of grief and memory. "Like music, like when you hear birds singing in the morning, but softer. She used to sing while she cooked, and while she did the washing, and while she worked in the garden. Even when she was tired, she'd hum. Little melodies she'd make up herself." "What did she sing about?" "Everything. Anything. Sometimes she'd sing about the weather, or the flowers growing outside, or what we were going to have for dinner. She made up a song about a raccoon who thought he was a dog. That was about Rocky, the raccoon she'd tamed." Despite everything, Jasper felt a smile tugging at his lips. She wasn't always on key, but she never let that stop her. "What did she smell like?" Clara's voice was getting softer, sleepier, but she was still listening. "Like lavender. She had a little sachet she kept in her clothes trunk filled with dried lavender she'd brought from Missouri. And like bread, because she was always baking. And like sunshine somehow. I don't know how to explain it, but she always smelled like sunshine felt." Evelyn had moved back slightly, giving them space, but Jasper could feel her presence. Supportive, steady, not intruding, just being there in case he needed her. "Did Mama ever get scared?" Clara asked. "Sure she did. She was afraid of thunderstorms. They made her jump every time. And she was scared of the winter we first came out here, worried we wouldn't make it through. But being scared didn't stop her from doing things. She used to say that brave people aren't people who don't feel fear. Brave people are the ones who feel fear and do what needs doing anyway." "Like me being sick?" Clara's eyes were half closed now, the fever and the crying having exhausted her. "Exactly like you being sick. You're scared, but you're fighting anyway. That's what Mama would have done. That's what she did do, right up until the end." Jasper's voice cracked. "She fought to bring you into this world, Clara, and I know that if she could see you now, she'd be so proud of how brave you're being." "Do you think she can see me? From heaven?" Jasper looked at Evelyn, desperate for help with this question. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. "I think," Jasper said carefully, "that wherever Mama is, she loves you. And love doesn't stop just because someone goes away. It stays. It lives on in the people left behind." He pressed a kiss to Clara's sweaty forehead. "Every time I look at you and see her eyes looking back at me, that's Mama's love. Every time you laugh like she used to laugh, that's Mama's love. Every time you show kindness to something small and helpless, like she always did, that's Mama's love living on in you." Clara was crying again, but quieter now, softer. "I wish I could have known her. I wish you could have too, baby girl, more than anything." Jasper held her close, and for the first time in 6 years, he let himself cry with her. Not hiding it, not turning away, just letting the grief flow through him and out of him like poison from a wound. "But you do know her in a way, because you're part of her. You're the best part of both of us." They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter crying together while the storm raged outside and the fire crackled in the hearth. Evelyn moved quietly around the cabin, giving them privacy while still keeping watch, still attending to the practical necessities of Clara's care. When Clara finally fell back asleep, her face was peaceful in a way it hadn't been before. as if some burden she'd been carrying, the burden of never knowing her mother, of wondering if she was forgotten, had been lifted. Jasper laid her back down gently, tucking the blankets around her with trembling hands. When he stood, he had to grip the bedpost to steady himself. He felt hollowed out, scraped clean, but also somehow lighter. Evelyn appeared at his elbow with a cup of water. He took it gratefully, drinking deep. "That was good," she said quietly. "What you did, what you told her. It hurt. Healing usually does." Evelyn's eyes were kind. "But sometimes the hurt is necessary. Sometimes we have to open the wound before it can close properly." Jasper thought about that, about how he'd been keeping his grief locked away, thinking he was protecting Clara from it. But maybe all he'd been doing was teaching her to lock away her own feelings, to never speak of the mother she'd lost before she ever knew her. "She needed to hear about Sarah," he said slowly, understanding dawning. She needed to know her mother was real, that she mattered, that losing her was worth grieving over. Everyone needs their grief acknowledged. Evelyn returned to the fire, stirring something in a pot that smelled of herbs. "When little Bird died, I wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. But her grandmother, our grandmother, she made me talk, made me tell stories, made me cry and rage and scream if I needed to. She said grief was like a river, it had to flow. If you tried to dam it up, it would just build pressure until it burst and destroyed everything." "How long did it take before the grief didn't hurt so much?" "It still hurts." Evelyn's voice was matter-of-fact. "But the hurt changed. It went from being a sharp, stabbing pain to something softer, an ache instead of agony. I can think about her now and smile instead of just crying. I can remember the good times without being crushed by the weight of losing her." She looked at him. "It will never stop hurting completely, but it will get easier, especially if you let yourself feel it instead of running from it." Jasper nodded slowly. He'd spent 6 years running. Maybe it was time to stop. The rest of the night passed in quiet watchfulness. Clara's fever remained high but stable, and her breathing continued to ease gradually. By the time gray dawn light began to seep through the frost-covered windows, Evelyn declared that they'd made it through the worst. "She's not out of danger yet," she cautioned as Jasper sagged with relief. "The next 24 hours are still critical, but she's fighting well. Her lungs are clearing and her body is responding to the treatment. I'd say we have reason to be cautiously optimistic." "Cautiously optimistic," Jasper repeated. "I'll take it." Evelyn smiled, and for the first time, Jasper noticed how exhausted she looked. She'd been awake all night, working tirelessly, never complaining. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her face. There were shadows under her eyes, and her dress was rumpled and stained with various medicines. "You need to rest," he said. "Let me take over for a while." "I'm fine." "You're dead on your feet." Jasper stood, moving toward her with deliberate purpose. "You've been telling me all night that I can't care for Clara if I don't take care of myself. Same applies to you. Go up to the loft and sleep. I'll wake you if anything changes." Evelyn looked like she wanted to argue, but another glance at Clara, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, seemed to convince her. "All right, but just for a few hours, and you wake me immediately if her fever spikes again or her breathing changes." "I will. I promise." She climbed the ladder to the loft, and Jasper heard her collapse onto the bedroll he'd been using. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Jasper settled himself beside Clara's bed, one hand resting lightly on his daughter's forehead. The fever was still there, but it felt less intense, more manageable. He watched her chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a prayer. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to ease. The wind had dropped from a scream to a moan, and the snow fell more gently now, big lazy flakes instead of the driving wall of white that had hammered the cabin all night. Jasper leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Just for a moment, just to rest. He woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee brewing. Disoriented, he jerked upright, his heart pounding. How long had he been asleep? What if Clara had taken a turn while he... But Clara was awake, sitting up slightly against the pillows, and Evelyn was beside her, holding a cup of broth. "There's Papa," Evelyn said, smiling. We were just about to wake you. Someone wanted to tell you good morning. Papa. Clara's voice was still hoarse, but it was stronger, clearer. I feel better. Jasper was across the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside the bed. He touched Clara's forehead and nearly wept with relief. The fever had broken. She was still warm, but it was normal warmth, not the terrifying heat that had burned through her for days. Baby girl? He couldn't keep the tremor out of his voice. How do you feel? Tired and hungry. Can I have more broth? Hungry. She was hungry. Jasper looked at Evelyn, who was grinning. The fever broke about an hour ago, Evelyn explained. I let you sleep because you needed it, and Clara was doing well. She's been awake for about 20 minutes, asking for you and asking for food, which is the best sign we could hope for. I had dreams, Clara said between sips of broth, but I don't remember them, and my chest doesn't hurt as much anymore. The infection is clearing. Evelyn set aside the empty broth cup and pulled back Clara's nightgown to check the poultice. I want to keep treating her for at least another 2 days to make sure it doesn't come back, but I think we can say she's going to be all right. She's going to be all right. The words washed over Jasper like warm rain. For 4 days, 4 endless, terrifying days, he'd been watching his daughter slip away from him, powerless to stop it. And now, thanks to this woman who'd ridden through a blizzard to help a stranger's child, Clara was going to live. Thank you. The words felt inadequate, too small to contain what he was feeling. I can't. His throat closed. Evelyn touched his shoulder, understanding without him having to say more. You're welcome, but we're not done yet. She still needs rest and medicine and careful monitoring. And you, she gave him a pointed look, need to eat a proper meal and get some real sleep, preferably more than the 2 hours you just got. Yes, ma'am. Jasper found himself smiling despite everything, or maybe because of everything. Clara giggled, a sound so unexpected and precious that both adults turned to stare at her. What's funny, sweetheart? Evelyn asked. Papa called Miss Evelyn ma'am. He never calls anyone ma'am. He says it makes him feel old. Clara's smile was weak but genuine. Does this mean Miss Evelyn is the boss now? Jasper felt his face heat. I was just being respectful. It's all right, Evelyn said, her eyes dancing with amusement. I rather like being the boss. And despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the grief he'd finally allowed himself to feel, Jasper laughed. It felt strange, rusty, like a gate that hadn't been opened in years. But it also felt good. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried in fresh snow. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warm and steady. Clara was alive. Evelyn was smiling, and for the first time in longer than Jasper could remember, he felt something that might have been hope taking root in his chest. It was fragile, this hope. Tentative, like the first green shoots pushing through snow in early spring. But it was there, and that was enough. The laughter faded into comfortable silence, but something had shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. It felt less like a place where people waited for death, and more like a place where life had decided to make a stand. Jasper found himself watching Evelyn as she moved around the small space, checking Clara's breathing, adjusting the blankets, her movements efficient but gentle. There was something about the way she worked, no wasted motion, no hesitation, that spoke of deep competence and deeper compassion. I should check on your horse, he said, suddenly remembering the bay mare that had carried Evelyn through the blizzard. She's been in the barn all night without proper care. Daisy can wait another hour. Evelyn didn't look up from grinding more herbs. You need to eat first. Real food this time, not just bread and cheese. When was the last time you had hot food? Jasper tried to remember and couldn't. A while. Then sit. I'll make something. She moved to his meager pantry, taking stock of what was there. Flour, some dried beans, a few strips of salt pork. Not much to work with, but her hands moved with confidence as she began to prepare a meal. You don't have to do that, Jasper protested, but it was weak. The truth was, he was starving, and the thought of hot food made his mouth water. I know I don't have to. I want to. Evelyn set a pan over the fire and adding pork fat to heat. Besides, you're no good to Clara if you collapse from malnutrition, And I didn't ride through a blizzard just to watch you waste away from stubbornness. Clara giggled again from the bed. She's definitely the boss, Papa. Traitor, Jasper muttered, but there was no heat in it. He settled into the chair, letting himself rest for the first time in what felt like forever. Through the window, he could see the world transformed by the storm. Snow lay in deep drifts against the barn, and icicles hung from the eaves like glass daggers catching the morning light. It was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Classic Wyoming. "Tell me about the ranch," Evelyn said as she worked, slicing the salt pork into a skillet. "What do you raise here?" "Cattle, mostly. Had about 30 head before winter set in. Lost 2 in the last storm." Jasper rubbed his face, feeling the rough stubble there. When had he last shaved? "It's not much, but it's ours, mine and Clara's. We make enough to get by." "Just barely from the look of things." Evelyn's tone was matter-of-fact, not judgmental. "No hired help?" "Can't afford it. I do what I can manage alone." He didn't mention how hard it was, working the ranch and caring for Clara with no wife to help shoulder the burden. Didn't mention the nights he fell into bed so exhausted he couldn't even dream, or the mornings he woke before dawn to start all over again. "That must be lonely." Evelyn added flour to the pan, stirring it into the pork fat to make gravy. "Just you and Clara out here, miles from town." "We manage." But even as he said it, Jasper realized how hollow it sounded. They didn't manage, not really. They survived. There was a difference. The smell of cooking pork filled the cabin, rich and savory. Clara sat up straighter in bed, her nose twitching. "That smells good." "It'll taste even better." Evelyn smiled at her. "But you'll start with more broth and work your way up to solid food. We don't want to upset your stomach after days of fever." "Yes, ma'am." Clara settled back against the pillows, looking more like herself than she had in days. The color was returning to her cheeks, and her eyes had lost that glassy, fevered look. She was still weak, still sick, but she was fighting her way back. Jasper felt his throat tighten with gratitude. 20 minutes later, Evelyn set a plate in front of him, salt pork and gravy over hard biscuits she'd somehow conjured from his sparse supplies. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and substantial, and Jasper's stomach cramped with anticipation as he picked up his fork. "Eat slowly," Evelyn reminded him, settling across from him with her own smaller portion. "Your stomach still needs time to adjust." He obeyed, taking small bites, chewing thoroughly. The food was simple but good, seasoned with herbs from Evelyn's supply that transformed the plain ingredients into something almost luxurious. As he ate, he watched her. Really watched her for the first time since she'd arrived. She was younger than he'd first thought, mid-20s maybe. Her face was pleasant without being beautiful in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about it, intelligence in her eyes, strength in the set of her jaw. And something else, something harder to name, a kind of quiet determination that suggested she'd weathered her own storms and come through them intact. "What?" she asked, catching him staring. "Just wondering why a woman like you isn't married." The words were out before he could stop them, and Jasper felt his face heat. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "It's all right." Evelyn set down her fork, considering the question. "I was engaged once, back in Philadelphia, to a lawyer, very respectable, very proper. My grandmother approved of him." "What happened?" "I realized I didn't love him. I respected him, liked him even, but I didn't love him the way a woman should love the man she's going to marry." She picked up her coffee cup, cradling it between her hands. "When my grandmother died and I decided to come west, he told me I was being foolish, said I was throwing away a good life for some romantic notion of adventure. He gave me an ultimatum, stay and marry him, or leave and lose him forever." "You chose to leave." "I chose to be true to myself." Evelyn's voice was steady, without regret. "I couldn't marry a man I didn't love just because it was convenient or expected, and I couldn't give up my calling as a healer just to be a lawyer's wife in a city where women are meant to be decorative rather than useful." Jasper found himself nodding. He understood that kind of choice, the kind where you had to choose between what was easy and what was right for your soul. He'd made a similar choice when he'd left Missouri with Sarah, heading west to build something of their own rather than working his father's farm for the rest of his life. Do you regret it? He asked. Coming west? Not for a moment. Evelyn's smile was genuine. Out here, I can be who I really am. I can use my skills to help people without worrying about whether it's appropriate for a lady. I can ride alone, make my own decisions, build my own life. That's worth more than all the respectability in Philadelphia. Even when you're riding through blizzards to help stubborn ranchers who don't know they need help? Especially then. Her eyes met his, and something passed between them. A moment of understanding, of recognition. Two people who'd chosen hard lives because the alternative was to live inauthentically. From the bed, Clara made a small sound. Both adults were on their feet immediately, but it was just the child shifting in her sleep, her breathing still deep and easy. The fever hadn't returned. She was healing. I should still check on your horse, Jasper said, needing suddenly to move, to do something with his hands. The cabin felt smaller somehow, the air charged with something he couldn't quite name. I'll come with you. Evelyn pulled on her heavy fur coat. I want to make sure she wasn't injured in the storm. And Clara will be fine for a few minutes. The worst has passed. They stepped out into a world transformed. The storm had left nearly 2 feet of fresh snow, and everything was buried in pristine white. The morning sun made it sparkle like someone had scattered diamonds across the prairie. The air was so cold it burned Jasper's lungs sharp and clean after the close warmth of the cabin. Beautiful, Evelyn breathed, her face turned up to the sky. I never get tired of this. The way the land looks after a snow, like the whole world's been made new. Jasper looked at her instead of the landscape, at the way the sunlight caught in her dark hair, at the flush the cold brought to her cheeks, at the wonder in her expression. When had he stopped seeing beauty in the snow? When had winter become just another trial to endure rather than something to marvel at? They trudged through the drifts to the barn, and Jasper had to put his shoulder against the door to force it open against the snow that had piled against it. Inside, the barn was dim and cold but sheltered from the wind. His own 2 horses, a gelding named Red and a mare called Sally, nickered softly from their stalls. And there, in the 3rd stall, stood Evelyn's bay mare, Daisy. Hey, girl! Evelyn moved to the horse immediately, running her hands over the mare's legs, checking for injuries. I'm sorry I left you out here all night, but you understand, don't you? There was a little girl who needed help. The horse woofed softly, butting her head against Evelyn's shoulder. Jasper found himself smiling at the obvious affection between woman and animal. She seems all right, Evelyn announced after a thorough examination. Cold and hungry, but no worse for wear. I'll feed all 3 of them. Jasper moved to get hay from his small supply. It was running low. He'd need to buy more soon, assuming he could get to town, assuming he had the money, always assuming something. They worked together in comfortable silence, Jasper feeding while Evelyn checked each horse for signs of frostbite or injury. The barn gradually filled with the sounds of horses eating, a peaceful rhythm that soothed something in Jasper's chest. Your stock looks good, Evelyn observed, patting Red's neck. Well cared for. Animals depend on you. Can't let them suffer because of your own troubles. Jasper scattered hay for Sally. Unlike people, they can't tell you what's wrong. Have to pay attention, notice the small things. That's good philosophy for healing too. Evelyn leaned against a stall door, watching him work. Half of medicine is observation, seeing what the patient can't or won't tell you. Is that what you saw with me? The things I wasn't telling you? I saw a man who'd been carrying too much weight for too long, who'd forgotten how to ask for help because he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve it. Her voice was gentle but direct. Am I wrong? Jasper's hand stilled in the hay. No, you're not wrong. Why don't you deserve help, Jasper? The use of his first name again, intimate, familiar, made something in his chest constrict. Because Clara got sick on my watch. Because I should have seen it coming, should have been able to prevent it. Because I'm her father, and it's my job to keep her safe, and I failed. You didn't fail. Children get sick. It's part of life. You can't control everything, no matter how hard you try. Evelyn pushed off from the stall door and moved closer. The fact that you care so deeply, that you'd starve yourself to feed her, that you'd rather die than lose her, that doesn't make you a failure. It makes you a father who loves his daughter. There's no shame in that. Then why does it feel like shame? The question came out raw, scraped from somewhere deep inside him. Why does it feel like every time something goes wrong, it's proof that I'm not enough, that I'll never be enough? Because grief has convinced you that you don't deserve happiness, that you don't deserve help or comfort or anything good because Sarah died and you lived. Evelyn's eyes were steady on his. But that's not true, Jasper. What happened to Sarah wasn't your fault. The choice you made, saving Clara, that was the right choice. The only choice. And you've been punishing yourself for it ever since. The words hit like hammer blows, each one driving deeper into the armor he'd built around his heart. Jasper turned away, gripping the edge of the stall door so hard his knuckles went white. I don't know how to stop, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to forgive myself for being alive when she's not. You start by accepting that you're allowed to be alive, that Clara needs you alive, not martyring yourself out of misplaced guilt. Evelyn's hand settled on his shoulder, warm, solid, real. You start by letting other people help you, by admitting you can't do everything alone, by believing that maybe, just maybe, you deserve more than mere survival. Jasper closed his eyes, feeling something crack inside him. The wall he'd built to keep the grief contained, to keep himself functional, was crumbling, and instead of feeling terrifying, it felt like relief. I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to know, you just have to try. Evelyn's voice was soft. One day at a time, one moment at a time, and on the days when it feels impossible, you let people who care about you carry some of the weight. People like you? He turned to face her, searching her eyes. People like me. She smiled, small but genuine. If you'll let me. They stood there in the dim barn, snow light filtering through cracks in the walls, and Jasper felt something shift. Not love. It was too soon for that, too fragile. But the possibility of it. The first tentative recognition that maybe his heart wasn't as dead as he thought. That maybe there was room in his life for something other than grief and duty and the daily grind of survival. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come, he said finally. If the sheriff hadn't sent you, Clara would be... He couldn't finish the sentence. But I did come, and Clara is going to be all right. Evelyn squeezed his shoulder once, then let her hand fall. That's what matters now. The rest, everything else, we can figure out as we go. They finished with the horses and made their way back to the cabin. The door had drifted shut, and Jasper had to dig through the snow to open it. Inside, the warmth enveloped them like an embrace. Clara was awake, sitting up in bed with more color in her cheeks than before. Papa, Miss Evelyn, look, I can sit up without getting dizzy. Her voice was excited, childlike in a way it hadn't been since before the fever. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Evelyn shed her coat and moved to check on her patient. How's your chest? Any pain when you breathe? A little, but not as bad as before. Clara took an experimental deep breath, and though she coughed at the end, it was a productive cough, not the dry, painful hack of before. Does this mean I'm getting better? It means you're doing exactly what you should be doing, fighting off the infection and healing. Evelyn felt Clara's forehead, checked her pulse. But you're not out of the woods yet. You'll need to keep taking medicine, keep resting, and eat when you can. No running around for at least a week. A whole week? Clara's face fell. But I'll be so bored. Jasper felt his lips twitch. His daughter complaining about being bored was the best sound he'd heard in days. It meant she was feeling well enough to have opinions again, to want more than just to sleep and not hurt. I'll tell you what, Evelyn said, settling on the edge of the bed. While you're recovering, I'll teach you about healing herbs. Would you like that? Clara's eyes lit up. Really? You'd teach me? Really? Every healer needs an apprentice, and you seem like a smart girl. We'll start with the basics. How to identify common herbs, what they're used for, how to prepare them. Evelyn glanced at Jasper. If your papa doesn't mind, of course. I don't mind at all. The idea of Clara having a skill, having knowledge that could help her survive in this harsh land, appealed to him deeply. Knowledge is something nobody can take from you. So Evelyn began to teach. She showed Clara dried thyme, explaining how it helped with lung ailments and coughs. She demonstrated how to make a simple tea with chamomile, good for settling upset stomachs and helping with sleep. She talked about yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, elderberry for building strength. Jasper sat and listened, fascinated despite himself. He'd never paid much attention to plants beyond whether his cattle could eat them. But hearing Evelyn talk about them, about the healing properties hidden in leaves and roots and flowers, he began to see the prairie differently, not just as harsh land to be endured, but as a pharmacy waiting to be understood. The Shoshone taught my grandmother everything, Evelyn explained to Clara. They've been living on this land for generations, learning which plants heal and which harm, which can be eaten and which should be avoided. They know more about medicine than most doctors back east with their fancy degrees. Did you learn from the Shoshone too? Clara asked, carefully touching a dried lavender sprig Evelyn had given her. Some. Mostly I learned from my grandmother who learned from them. But when I came west, I spent time with a Shoshone healing woman named Running Deer. She taught me things my grandmother never knew, songs to sing while preparing medicine, prayers to say while treating patients, ways of seeing sickness not just as something to fight, but as an imbalance to correct. What kind of imbalance? Jasper found himself asking. The Shoshone believe that illness comes when a person is out of balance with their body, their spirit, their environment. Healing isn't just about removing the sickness. It's about restoring balance. Evelyn's hands moved as she talked, graceful and expressive. So we don't just treat the cough. We treat the whole person, body and mind and spirit, together. It made a strange kind of sense. Jasper thought about his own life, how out of balance he'd been since Sarah died. Working himself to exhaustion, never resting, pushing Clara and himself through each day with grim determination rather than anything resembling joy. No wonder they'd both gotten to the breaking point. The day passed in a gentle rhythm. Clara ate more broth, this time with bits of soft bread soaked in it. She kept it down without trouble, which Evelyn declared a victory. Jasper dozed in the chair by the fire, his body finally giving in to the exhaustion of the past days. And Evelyn moved between them both, ever watchful, ever capable. A steady presence that made the cabin feel less like a lonely outpost and more like a home. As afternoon faded toward evening, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. Jasper stood at the window, watching them build, his jaw tight with tension. "Another storm coming," he said. "That's the third this week." Evelyn joined him at the window, following his gaze. "How bad?" "Hard to tell. Could just be snow flurries, could be another blizzard." He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the knot of stress there. "If it's bad, you'll be stuck here. The road to town will be impassable." "Then I'll be stuck here." Evelyn's voice was calm, unconcerned. "I told you I was staying until Clara was safe. A little extra snow won't change that." "It could be days before the road's clear." "Then it will be days." She turned to face him, and in the fading light, her eyes were very dark. "Unless you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than he intended. "No, I don't want you to leave. People will talk. A woman staying alone with a man, even with Clara here as chaperone. Let them talk." Evelyn's chin lifted slightly, defiant. "I'm not leaving a recovering child just to protect my reputation, and anyone who knows me knows I wouldn't do anything improper. My conscience is clear." "Is yours?" Jasper felt his face heat. "Yes, of course." "Then it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks." She moved back toward the fire, toward where Clara was watching them with wide, curious eyes. "Besides, I rather think this town has more important things to worry about than where their healer sleeps during a storm." The wind picked up as darkness fell, rattling the shutters and moaning through the eaves. Jasper reinforced the fire, building it up high against the coming cold. They ate a simple dinner, more of the salt pork, beans that Evelyn had been soaking all day, the last of the bread. It was plain food, but it felt like a feast after days of near starvation. Clara dozed off soon after eating, worn out from the excitement of the day. Evelyn checked her one more time, declaring her fever still gone, her breathing much improved, before banking the fire for the night. "She's doing remarkably well," Evelyn said, settling into the chair across from Jasper. "Better than I'd hoped, honestly. Children are resilient, but she's shown exceptional fight." "She gets that from her mother." Jasper stared into the fire, watching flames dance across the logs. "Sarah never gave up on anything. Once she set her mind to something, that was it, stubborn as the day is long. Sounds like someone else I know. Evelyn's voice was teasing, gentle. Jasper smiled despite himself. Fair point. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind build outside and the fire crackle in the hearth. Jasper found himself stealing glances at Evelyn, at the way firelight played across her features, at the peace in her expression, at the capable hands folded in her lap. Why did you really come? He asked suddenly. The truth. Not the story about the sheriff sending you. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. The sheriff did send me, but I chose to come. When he told me about a widower out on the prairie with a sick child, about how you'd been seen riding into town for supplies looking half dead yourself, about how Clara's coughing could be heard by passing riders. She paused. I knew what that looked like. I knew what it meant. A man too proud or too scared to ask for help, watching his child die rather than admit he couldn't do it alone. I've seen it before, and every time I see it, I think about all the times I could have done something and didn't. So when the sheriff asked if I'd ride out here, I didn't hesitate. You could have died in that storm. But I didn't, and neither did Clara. That's what matters. She met his eyes across the fire. I'm not afraid of storms, Jasper. I'm afraid of standing by and doing nothing when I have the power to help. Something in her voice told him she was talking about more than just Clara, more than just this one illness. There was a story there, a wound that had never quite healed. He wanted to ask, but didn't know if he had the right. Someone you couldn't save? He asked carefully. Evelyn's expression flickered, pain, quick and sharp, before she smoothed it away. My younger brother. He got sick when I was 18, just starting to learn real healing from my grandmother. I thought I knew what I was doing, thought I could handle it. Her hands tightened in her lap. I was wrong. He died 3 days later. And I've spent every day since then making sure I never make that mistake again, that I never let pride or fear or uncertainty keep me from doing everything in my power to save a life. That wasn't your fault, Jasper said quietly. You were young, still learning. I know that now. Logically, I understand it wasn't my fault, but understanding something and forgiving yourself for it are two different things. She looked at him, and there was recognition in her eyes. You know that better than anyone. He did. God, he did. The parallel between them was suddenly, startlingly clear. Two people carrying guilt for deaths they hadn't caused, punishment they didn't deserve, doing penance for the crime of surviving when someone they loved hadn't. How do you live with it? He asked. The guilt? I try to make his death mean something. Every life I save, every child I heal, that's for him. That's my way of honoring his memory, making sure other families don't have to suffer what mine did. She brushed at her eyes, though no tears had fallen. It doesn't make the guilt go away, but it makes it bearable. Jasper thought about that, about making Sarah's death mean something beyond just survival, about raising Clara not just to avoid losing her, but to give her a life worth living, about allowing himself to be more than just a father going through the motions, too afraid of loving again to really live. Thank you, he said finally, for telling me that, and for coming here, for staying. You don't have to keep thanking me. I do, though, because I don't know how to express what it means that you cared enough to risk your life for my daughter, for me. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, needing her to understand. I've been alone for so long, doing everything myself, never asking for help, convinced I didn't deserve it. And then you showed up in the middle of a blizzard and you didn't give me a choice about accepting help. You just gave it. And I'm realizing now how much I needed that. Everyone needs help sometimes. Evelyn's voice was soft. There's no shame in it. I'm starting to believe that. Because of you. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the snow had started again, hissing against the windows. But inside the cabin, warmth had settled over them like a blanket, not just from the fire, but from something less tangible. Understanding, connection, the beginning of something neither of them had names for yet. Tell me something, Evelyn said after a while. What do you want? Not for Clara, not for the ranch. What do you want for yourself? No one had asked Jasper that question in 6 years. He'd stopped thinking about what he wanted, focusing only on what he needed to do to survive. But sitting here with Evelyn in the firelight, with his daughter breathing easy in her bed and a storm raging harmlessly outside, he let himself think about it. "I want to feel alive again," he said finally. "Not just surviving day to day, but actually living. I want to laugh without feeling guilty about it. I want to make plans for the future instead of just trying to get through each winter. I want—" He stopped, surprised by what he'd been about to say. "What?" Evelyn prompted gently. "I want to stop being so damn lonely." The admission cost him, but it also felt like freedom. "I want someone to talk to besides a 6-year-old. I want someone to share the work with, to make decisions with. I want to come inside at the end of the day and have someone ask how I'm doing and actually care about the answer." "That sounds like you want more than just help around the ranch." "Maybe I do." Jasper met her eyes. "Maybe I want someone who understands what it's like to carry grief. Someone who's strong enough to handle this life. Someone who makes me feel like I'm more than just a father or a rancher, like I'm a person who deserves good things too." The air between them felt charged suddenly, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. Evelyn held his gaze, and he could see the war playing out in her expression. Caution versus curiosity, self-protection versus the risk of opening her heart. "Be careful, Jasper," she said softly. "You're talking like a man who's starting to feel something he hasn't felt in a long time. And that can be dangerous when you're vulnerable, when you're grateful to someone for saving your child's life. I know the difference between gratitude and—" He stopped, not sure what to call this feeling blooming in his chest. "And whatever this is?" "Do you?" "Because grief can make us grab onto the first person who shows us kindness, and I don't want to be something you reach for just because you're drowning. I don't want to be a replacement for what you lost." Her words were wise, careful, protective of them both. And Jasper appreciated that even as part of him wanted to argue, wanted to insist that this was real, that he knew his own heart. But did he? Could he trust his own feelings when they'd been locked away for so long? Could he tell the difference between genuine connection and the desperate gratitude of a drowning man reaching for a lifeline? "You're right," he said finally. "I don't know what I'm feeling. Not really. It's all too new, too complicated. But I do know that I want the chance to figure it out. With you. If you're willing." Evelyn was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant, thoughtful. "I'm willing to stay until Clara is fully recovered. Beyond that—" She shook her head. "I don't know, Jasper. I have a life in town, patients who need me. I can't just abandon my responsibilities." "I wouldn't ask you to." "Wouldn't you?" "Because that's what it would mean, eventually. If this, whatever this is, went anywhere, one of us would have to give up everything we've built. And I've worked too hard to build a life on my own terms to surrender it lightly." It was honest. Brutally, painfully honest. And Jasper respected her for it, even as his heart sank. Because she was right. What future could there be for a rancher tied to his land and a healer tied to her practice in town? The math didn't work. The logistics were impossible. "Then we'll just be glad for this time," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "For Clara getting better. For you being here when we needed you. And we won't worry about anything beyond that." That's probably wise. But Evelyn's voice held a note of something, regret maybe, or disappointment, as if part of her wished the answer could be different. They sat in silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts as the fire burned low and the snow continued to fall outside. Eventually, Evelyn excused herself to check on Clara one more time before retiring to the loft for the night. Jasper remained by the fire, staring into the dying embers and wondering how his heart had opened wide enough to hurt again after being closed for so long. Because it did hurt. This sudden, unexpected connection with a woman he barely knew. It hurt in the way that hope hurts when you haven't allowed yourself to feel it in years. It hurt in the way that wanting something beyond mere survival hurts when you've convinced yourself that survival is enough. Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Jasper moved to her bedside, touching her forehead gently. Still cool, still fever-free. His daughter was going to live. That was what mattered. That was what he should focus on. But as he settled back into his chair and pulled a blanket over himself, he couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn, about the way she'd looked in the firelight, about the understanding in her eyes, about the possibility of a future he hadn't let himself imagine in 6 long years. The storm howled outside, burying the world in snow. But inside Jasper's heart, something entirely different was happening. Something was thawing. Something was beginning to bloom. And whether that was wise or foolish, blessing or curse, remained to be seen. Morning came with silence. The kind of deep, muffled quiet that only happens after heavy snow, when the world seems to hold its breath. Jasper woke to pale sunlight streaming through the frost-painted windows and the smell of coffee already brewing. For a confused moment, he forgot where he was, why there was someone else moving around his cabin. Then memory returned. Clara's illness, the blizzard, Evelyn. He sat up slowly, his back protesting from another night in the chair. Through the window, he could see that the storm had indeed returned with a vengeance. Fresh snow had buried the paths he'd cleared the day before, and drifts reached halfway up the barn walls. They weren't going anywhere today. Maybe not tomorrow either. "You're awake." Evelyn appeared from the direction of the stove, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She looked tired. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept well, but her movements were as capable as ever. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in days." It was true. Despite the chair, despite everything, he'd slept deeply, dreamlessly, his body finally catching up on rest it desperately needed. "And you?" "Well enough." She handed him one of the cups, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Jasper felt the touch like a spark, quick and electric. Clara woke once in the night, but only to use the chamber pot. Her fever's still gone. "I'd say we're past the crisis point." Jasper looked toward the bed where his daughter slept, her face peaceful, her breathing deep and regular. The overwhelming relief he felt made his hands shake slightly, nearly spilling the coffee. "Thank God," he breathed. "Thank God and thank you." "We're not completely out of danger yet." Evelyn settled into the other chair, cradling her own cup. "She'll need another few days of medicine and rest, and I want to watch for any signs of relapse. But yes, I believe she's going to make a full recovery." They drank their coffee in silence, both watching Clara sleep. Outside, a sharp wind rattled the shutters, reminding them that while one storm had passed, another had arrived to take its place. "How long do you think we'll be snowed in?" Evelyn asked after a while. Jasper moved to the window, assessing the drifts with a practiced eye. 2 days, maybe 3, depends on whether the snow stops or keeps coming, and whether the wind dies down enough for me to dig us out. Your cattle will be all right for a few days. They're in the south pasture where there's some shelter from the wind. I put out extra hay before the first storm." He turned back to face her. "We have enough food to last a week if we're careful. Longer if we stretch it. Water's not a problem. Plenty of snow to melt. We'll be fine." "You sound very certain." "I've weathered worse storms than this." Jasper's voice was matter-of-fact. "First winter Sarah and I spent out here, we got snowed in for nearly 3 weeks. Thought we'd lose our minds from cabin fever, but we made it through. This is nothing by comparison." Evelyn studied him over the rim of her cup. "You must have loved her very much." "I did." The words came easier now, less weighted with guilt. "Still do, in a way. But I'm starting to understand that loving someone who's gone doesn't mean I have to stop living myself." "That's growth." Evelyn's voice was soft. "That's healing." "It's terrifying is what it is." Jasper set down his cup, needing his hands free to gesture, to express what words couldn't quite capture. "For 6 years, grief has been, I don't know, like an old coat. Uncomfortable, but familiar. I knew how to wear it, how to move in it. And now you come along, and suddenly it doesn't fit right anymore. Suddenly, I'm feeling things I haven't felt since Sarah died, and I don't know what to do with them." "What kind of things?" Jasper met her eyes, and the question there was genuine, without artifice. She wanted to know. Not to torment him, not to make him uncomfortable, but because she genuinely wanted to understand what he was feeling. "Hope," he said finally. "Interest in something beyond just getting through each day. The possibility that maybe there's more to life than work and duty, and making sure Clara survives to adulthood." He paused. "An attraction. To you, in case that wasn't already painfully obvious." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but he saw her fingers tighten slightly on her cup. It wasn't obvious. Or rather, I wasn't sure if what I was seeing was real attraction or just gratitude mixed with proximity and vulnerability. It's real. Jasper's voice was steady, certain. I know the difference between being grateful and being whatever this is. You've made me remember what it feels like to want to know someone, to look forward to conversation, to notice the way someone moves or speaks or thinks. I haven't felt that in a very long time. And that scares you. Terrifies me. He managed a weak smile. Because I don't know what to do about it. I don't know if I should do anything about it. You're here to help Clara, not to... He gestured vaguely, unable to finish the sentence. Not to become romantically entangled with her father? Evelyn supplied, a hint of wry humor in her voice. Exactly. She was quiet for a long moment, turning her cup in her hands, watching the coffee swirl. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something too. You're a good man, Jasper Hale. A devoted father, a hard worker, someone who survived incredible loss and kept going. That's attractive, compelling, even. Jasper's heart beat faster. But I've built a life in town, a practice, a reputation, a place where I'm useful and needed. And you have this ranch, this land that you've poured 6 years of your life into. Neither of us can just walk away from those commitments. She set down her cup with a decisive clink. So whatever this is, whatever we're feeling, it doesn't have anywhere to go. It can't. The words were logical, practical, absolutely correct. And they hit Jasper like a physical blow because he knew she was right. There was no future here, no way forward that didn't require one of them to sacrifice everything they'd built. So what do we do? He asked quietly. We focus on Clara. We get her well. And then I go back to town and you go back to your life. And we both remember these few days as a moment. Nothing more. A moment. Jasper tested the word, found it insufficient. What he was feeling didn't fit into something as small and contained as a moment. But what choice did they have? Before he could respond, Clara stirred in the bed, making a small sound. Both adults moved toward her immediately, their personal conversation forgotten in the face of their shared concern for the child. Papa? Claire's voice was scratchy but stronger than it had been. I'm hungry. Jasper felt his face break into a genuine smile. That's the best thing you could have said, baby girl. What do you want? Broth? Bread? Real food. Clara struggled to sit up, and Evelyn helped support her with pillows. I'm tired of broth. Can I have eggs? Evelyn and Jasper exchanged glances. Eggs might be too rich just yet, Evelyn said diplomatically. How about we try some soft bread with butter? If that stays down, maybe eggs for dinner? Clara's face fell, but she nodded. All right, but I really am hungry. Really, really hungry. Hunger is good. Evelyn smoothed Clara's hair back from her forehead, checking for fever with the gesture. It means your body is ready to heal. We'll get you fed, don't worry. As Jasper prepared bread and butter for Clara, he found himself watching Evelyn with his daughter. The gentle way she adjusted the pillows, the patience in her voice as she explained why Clara needed to eat slowly, the genuine warmth in her expression. She would have made a good mother, he thought. Would make a good mother if she ever chose that path. The thought brought a pang of something complicated, not quite jealousy, not quite regret, just a deep awareness of all the things that might have been in a different world under different circumstances. Clara ate slowly, carefully, while Evelyn and Jasper watched like hawks for any sign of nausea or distress. But the bread stayed down, and after a while Clara asked for more. They gave her a second piece, smaller than the first, and then made her rest while her stomach adjusted. I feel so much better, Clara announced, settling back against the pillows. Almost normal again. You're doing wonderfully, Evelyn assured her, but you still need rest. Your body has been fighting a serious infection that takes time to fully recover from. Miss Evelyn? Clara's voice was tentative, uncertain. Will you have to leave soon, now that I'm better? The question hung in the air. Jasper found himself holding his breath, waiting for Evelyn's answer. Not immediately, Evelyn said carefully. The storm has us snowed in for a few days at least, and I want to make sure you're completely recovered before I go, so you're stuck with me a little while longer. Good. Clara's smile was bright, genuine. I like having you here. It feels like we're a family, like how Papa says it used to be when Mama was alive. The words struck Jasper in the chest. He glanced at Evelyn and saw his own complex emotions reflected in her face. Pleasure at being accepted, pain at the impossibility of what Clara was imagining, tenderness for the child who just wanted wholeness. That's sweet of you to say, Evelyn managed, her voice only slightly strained. But your papa and I are just friends, honey. I'm here as a healer to help you get better. But you could be more than friends. Clara's voice held the simple certainty of childhood. Papa needs someone. He gets lonely, even though he tries to hide it. And you're nice, and you make good medicine, and you don't mind the snow. That's important if you're going to live in Wyoming. Clara. Jasper's voice was gentle but firm. That's not how these things work. Miss Evelyn has her own life in town. We can't just... Why not? Clara's eyes were very direct, very serious. Mama would want you to be happy, Papa. She told you to save me instead of her because she loved us and wanted us to have good lives. That means you too, not just me. Don't you think she'd want you to have someone to love again? The question hit like an arrow, straight and true. Jasper opened his mouth, closed it, found he had no answer. Would Sarah have wanted him to find love again? In his heart, he knew the answer. Sarah had been pragmatic beneath all her romantic notions. She would have wanted him to be happy, to give Clara a mother, to build a full life rather than just surviving. But knowing what Sarah would have wanted and being able to act on it were two different things. It's complicated, sweetheart, he said finally. Adult things usually are, but I promise you I'm all right. We're all right, just you and me. Clara looked unconvinced but let the subject drop. She was tired again, the brief burst of energy from eating fading quickly. Within minutes, she drifted back to sleep. Jasper and Evelyn moved away from the bed, giving Clara space to rest. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, the air thick with everything they weren't saying. She's perceptive, Evelyn said finally, keeping her voice low. Children often are. She's lonely. Jasper's throat was tight. She doesn't have other children to play with out here. No mother, just me. And I'm not enough. I know that. I just don't know how to fix it. You're more than enough. Evelyn's hand found his arm, squeezed gently. She's a happy child, Jasper, loved, cared for, bright and curious. You've done a remarkable job raising her alone. Don't let guilt tell you otherwise. Then why does she want so badly for us to... He couldn't finish the sentence. Because she's 6 and she doesn't understand complexity. She sees that her father is lonely and that there's a woman here who makes him smile, and in her child's logic that means we should be together. Evelyn's voice was sad, understanding. She doesn't understand all the reasons why that's not possible. What if... Jasper stopped, unsure if he should voice the thought, but they were already being honest with each other. Might as well continue. What if we made it possible? What if there was a way? Jasper, just hear me out. He turned to face her fully, needing her to see how serious he was. What if you didn't go back to town? What if you stayed here with us? You could still practice healing. God knows there are enough ranchers and homesteaders out this way who need medical care. You could build a practice here, maybe even a better one than you have in town. Evelyn's expression was pained. And what would I do in the winter when the roads are impassable and I can't reach patients? What happens when someone in town needs me urgently and I'm too far away to help? I can't abandon people who depend on me just because... She stopped herself. Just because what? Just because I'm attracted to a man I barely know. The words came out sharper than perhaps she intended. Jasper, we've known each other for 3 days. 3 days of crisis and intensity, yes, but still only 3 days. You can't make life-altering decisions based on 3 days. My mother knew my father for 2 weeks before she agreed to marry him. They were happy together for 30 years before she died. That's different. How? Because... Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides, frustration evident. Because I've already given up everything once for a man who wanted me to be something I wasn't. I moved across the country to escape that life, to build something of my own on my own terms. And now you're asking me to give it all up again, to become a ranch wife in the middle of nowhere, taking care of your home and your child while my own calling gets pushed aside. That's not what I'm asking, Jasper's voice was firm. I would never ask you to stop being a healer. I'd support it, help you build whatever practice you wanted. I'm asking you to consider whether what you have in town is worth more than what we could build together. And I'm telling you that I don't know. Evelyn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or just the circumstances. I don't know if I can trust myself to make good decisions when I'm exhausted and emotionally compromised. I don't know if you can trust your feelings when you're vulnerable and grateful and your daughter is begging for a mother. The honesty of it cut deep, because she was right. How could either of them trust their feelings in this situation? How could they separate genuine connection from the intensity of the circumstances that had brought them together? Then what do we do? Jasper asked, and he hated how lost he sounded, like a child asking an adult to fix something broken. We wait. Evelyn's voice was steadier now, as if coming to a decision had given her strength. We wait until Clara is fully recovered and the roads are clear. We wait until I can go back to town and you can return to your normal life. And then, if what we're feeling is real, if it's still there when we're not in crisis, when we have time to think clearly, then maybe we talk about this again. It was reasonable, mature, the right thing to do. And Jasper hated every word of it because waiting meant uncertainty. Waiting meant she might leave and never come back. Waiting meant living with the possibility that this feeling blooming in his chest might wither and die from neglect. But he also understood the wisdom in her words. They barely knew each other. 3 days together, no matter how intense, couldn't be the foundation for a life-changing decision. All right, he said finally. We wait. But Evelyn, he waited until she met his eyes. I want you to know that what I'm feeling is real. Maybe it's too soon. Maybe it's foolish, but it's real. And it's going to be real whether you're here or in town or on the other side of the world. Something in her expression softened. I believe you. And I think what I'm feeling is real too. But we both need time to be sure, time away from the intensity of all this. They stood facing each other in the small cabin, the fire crackling between them, Clara sleeping peacefully nearby, the storm raging outside. And Jasper felt the weight of the moment, the potential, the possibility, the terrible risk of opening his heart after so long closed. I can wait, he said quietly. I've waited 6 years to feel anything again. I can wait a little longer to see if this is real. Evelyn's smile was sad but genuine. Thank you for understanding. The rest of that day and the next passed in a strange kind of suspended time. The storm continued, keeping them trapped in the cabin, but the crisis atmosphere had lifted. Clara continued to improve, eating more, sleeping less, asking endless questions about herbs and healing that Evelyn answered with patient enthusiasm. Jasper worked on small repairs around the cabin, fixed a loose board in the loft, mended tack that had been waiting for attention. They moved around each other with careful courtesy, both acutely aware of what they'd said and what it meant. On the third morning, Jasper woke to silence. Real silence, without wind. He moved to the window and saw that the storm had finally passed. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, and though the snow lay deep, the worst was over. Roads should be passable by tomorrow, he said to Evelyn over breakfast. Day after at the latest. She nodded, something unreadable in her expression. Then I should probably start preparing to leave soon. Make sure I have everything ready. Clara, who had been eating porridge with surprising appetite, looked up sharply. Leave? But you just said you'd stay until I was completely better. And you are better, sweetheart. Evelyn's voice was gentle. Your fever's been gone for days. Your lungs are clear. You're eating normally. You don't need me anymore. But I want you here. Clara's voice trembled on the edge of tears. Please don't go. Please stay with us. Jasper felt his heart break a little. Clara, Miss Evelyn has other patients in town who need her. She can't stay here forever just because we want her to. Why not? Clara's tears spilled over now, running down her cheeks. Why can't she stay? We have room. She likes it here. I know she does. And you like her, Papa. I can tell. So why can't she just stay and be part of our family? Because life doesn't work that way, baby girl. Jasper knelt beside her chair, wiping her tears with his thumb. Sometimes we care about people who can't stay with us. That doesn't make the caring less real or important. It just means we have to be grateful for the time we had together. That's not fair. Clara's voice was thick with tears and anger. Nothing's fair. Mama died and I never got to know her, and now Miss Evelyn has to leave too, and we'll be alone again. I hate being alone, Papa. I hate it. The words drove into Jasper like stakes. He'd known Clara was lonely, but hearing her say it so plainly with such raw emotion made it impossible to ignore or minimize. Evelyn had moved closer, kneeling on Clara's other side. Hey, sweetheart. Look at me. She waited until Clara's teary eyes met hers. Just because I'm leaving doesn't mean I'm gone forever. I'll come visit, and you can come to town to see me. We'll still be friends. It's not the same. Clara was crying in earnest now, big, hiccuping sobs. It's not the same as having you here all the time. It's not the same as having a family. Jasper gathered his daughter into his arms, holding her while she cried. Over her head, his eyes met Evelyn's, and what he saw there matched his own anguish, the terrible awareness of causing pain to a child who'd already endured too much loss. I know it's not the same, he murmured into Clara's hair. I know, baby. I know. They stayed like that for a long time, Clara crying, Jasper holding her, Evelyn's hand resting on Clara's back in comfort and support. Outside, the sun climbed higher in a crystalline sky, beautiful and indifferent to human heartbreak. When Clara's tears finally subsided into sniffles, Evelyn spoke, her voice careful. Clara, can I tell you something? Something true? Clara nodded against Jasper's chest. I don't want to leave either. Evelyn's voice was thick with emotion. These past days with you and your papa, they've been special to me. You've both reminded me what it feels like to be part of something, to be needed not just as a healer, but as a person. I'm going to miss you both terribly. Then stay. Clara pulled back from Jasper to look at Evelyn directly. If you don't want to leave and we don't want you to leave, then just stay, please. It's not that simple. Why not? Clara's voice rose with frustration. Grown-ups always say things aren't simple, but maybe they are, and you just make them complicated. You like us. We like you. Papa needs someone, and you're nice. Why can't you just stay and marry Papa and be my mama? The directness of it, the child's logic stripped of all adult complexity, left both Jasper and Evelyn speechless for a moment. Because, Evelyn started, then stopped, clearly struggling for words that would make sense to a 6-year-old. Because marriage is a big decision. It's not something you rush into just because everyone likes each other. But you love each other. Clara's voice held absolute certainty. I can tell. I see how Papa looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, and you look at him the same way. That's love, isn't it? Jasper felt his face heat. Clara, that's not... Is she wrong? Evelyn's voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made Jasper's heart stutter. Is she wrong about how you look at me? The question hung in the air, impossible to ignore or deflect. Jasper met Evelyn's eyes and saw his own uncertainty, his own fear, his own desperate hope reflected back at him. No, he said finally, honestly. She's not wrong. Then, Evelyn's voice cracked slightly. Then maybe we're the ones being foolish. Maybe we're making this more complicated than it needs to be. What are you saying? I'm saying... Evelyn took a shaky breath. I'm saying that I've spent 3 days with you, and in those 3 days you've made me feel more alive, more myself, more hopeful about the future than I've felt in years. I'm saying that the thought of leaving, of going back to town in my empty room above the practice, of not seeing you or Clara again except for occasional visits, it makes me physically ill. Jasper's breath caught. Evelyn, I'm saying that maybe Clara is right. Maybe we're making this complicated when it's actually simple. You need help. I need... She paused, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I need to be needed, not just as a healer, but as a person, as a woman. And I think I might be falling in love with you, Jasper Hale. Which is terrifying, and probably foolish and definitely too fast, but it's true. The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in their implications. Jasper's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "I know I'm falling in love with you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I knew it yesterday, maybe even the day before. And I agree it's terrifying and too fast and probably foolish, but it's also the most real thing I've felt since Sarah died." Clara was looking between them, her tear-stained face transforming into hope. "Does this mean Miss Evelyn is staying?" Evelyn laughed, and it came out half-sob. "I don't know. I honestly don't know. This is crazy. We barely know each other. I have responsibilities in town. You have a ranch. There are so many practical considerations. Then we'll figure them out." Jasper moved closer, until he was kneeling directly in front of her. "Together. If you're willing to try, to take this risk, then we'll figure out the rest. I know it won't be easy. I know there are complications. But Evelyn, I've been just surviving for 6 years. And you've made me want to actually live again. That's worth fighting for. What if it doesn't work? What if we're wrong about this? Then we'll have tried. We'll have taken the chance." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "But what if we're right? What if this is exactly what we're both supposed to find?" Evelyn stared at their joined hands, and Jasper could see the war playing out in her expression. Fear versus hope, caution versus courage. He held his breath, waiting, letting her make the choice in her own time. Finally she looked up, and there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I must be out of my mind," she whispered. "But yes, I'll stay. We'll try." Clara let out a whoop of joy that would have been deafening in the small cabin if it weren't so welcome. She launched herself at Evelyn, wrapping her thin arms around the woman's neck in a fierce hug. "You're staying! You're really staying! Papa, did you hear? She's staying!" "I heard, baby girl." Jasper's own vision was blurry with tears he didn't bother to hide. "I heard." Evelyn held Clara with one arm and reached for Jasper with the other, and suddenly all three of them were embracing, laughing, and crying in equal measure. Outside, the sun continued its climb through the winter sky, and the snow sparkled like a promise of new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, all three of them grinning like fools, Evelyn wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "We should talk about practicalities," she said, though her voice was still thick with emotion. "I'll need to go back to town, at least temporarily, to settle my affairs. Tell my landlord, inform my patients, pack my things." "Of course." Jasper nodded, trying to be reasonable, even though every fiber of his being wanted to tell her never to leave. "Take whatever time you need. I'll wait. We'll wait. And I'll need to keep seeing patients. I meant what I said about not giving up healing. That's part of who I am." "I know. We'll make it work." Jasper's mind was already turning over possibilities. "Maybe we could fix up one of the outbuildings as a clinic. Homesteaders could come here instead of you having to travel to them. Or you could still go to town a few days a week if needed. We'll figure it out." "You're serious about this?" Wonder filled Evelyn's voice. "About making room for my calling, not just asking me to be a wife and mother. I'm serious about loving all of you, not just the parts that are convenient." Jasper took both her hands in his. "I want you to be happy, Evelyn, to be fulfilled, to keep being the remarkable healer you are. I just also want you to be here, with us, building a life together." Fresh tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks. "I don't think no one's ever said anything like that to me before." "Then they were fools." Jasper's voice was fierce. "Anyone who asked you to be less than you are was a fool who didn't deserve you." Clara, who had been watching this exchange with bright, happy eyes, suddenly said, "Does this mean Miss Evelyn is going to be my new mama?" The question stopped both adults short. They looked at each other, uncertain how to answer. "That's," Evelyn started, then paused. "That's something we'd need to talk about, sweetheart. Marriage is a big step. We'd need time to marry me." The words tumbled out of Jasper before he could stop them. "I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. But marry me, Evelyn. Not someday. Not eventually. Marry me as soon as we can make it happen." Evelyn stared at him, clearly shocked. "Jasper, I know my own heart. Maybe I shouldn't, maybe it's too soon, but I do. And my heart says that you're it for me, that I don't want to waste any more time being cautious when life is short and uncertain. I lost Sarah when I thought we had forever ahead of us. I learned the hard way that tomorrow isn't promised." He squeezed her hands. "So I'm asking you now. Marry me. Build this life with me. Be Clara's mother and my wife and the healer who saves lives, and whatever else you want to be. Just be ours." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Clara held her breath, eyes wide. Jasper's heart pounded as he waited for Evelyn's response. "You're serious," she said finally. "You're actually serious." "As I've ever been about anything. We've known each other less than a week." "I know. People will say we're rushing into this. Let them. There are 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea. Name one that matters more than the fact that I love you and you love me." Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, bright and real, and full of the courage it takes to leap into the unknown. "I can't," she admitted. "I can't think of a single reason that matters more than that." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." Her smile widened. "God help me. That's a yes. I'll marry you, Jasper Hale." Clara shrieked with joy, bouncing on her toes. "She said yes! Papa, she said yes! We're going to be a real family!" Jasper pulled Evelyn into his arms, and this time when their lips met, it was a kiss. Gentle, careful, but full of promise. It lasted only a moment before Clara threw herself against their legs, demanding to be included in the embrace. So they lifted her up between them and stood there in the small cabin, three people who'd found each other in a blizzard and decided to brave whatever storms came next together. When Jasper finally set Clara down, the child was practically vibrating with excitement. "When's the wedding? Can I wear a special dress? Will there be cake?" "Soon," Evelyn promised, laughing through her tears. "We'll figure out all the details, but yes, there will definitely be cake." "And flowers?" "If we can find any in February in Wyoming, then yes, flowers too." Jasper watched them planning, his daughter and his future wife, and felt something in his chest that he thought was dead come fully back to life. Not just hope, joy. Real, uncomplicated joy at the thought of the future stretching ahead of them. Outside, the world was buried in snow, but inside Jasper Hale's cabin, spring had already begun to bloom. The week that followed moved with the strange velocity of dreams, too fast and too slow all at once. Jasper spent his days digging out from the storm, checking on cattle that had weathered the blizzard better than he'd dared hope, and stealing glances at Evelyn as she moved through his cabin, like she'd always belonged there. She'd integrated herself into their lives with surprising ease, cooking meals while teaching Clara about nutrition and herbs, mending clothes while explaining the medicinal properties of different plants, turning everyday tasks into lessons that held his daughter spellbound. But underneath the domestic harmony, Jasper could sense Evelyn's internal struggle. She'd catch her staring out the window toward town, her expression troubled. She'd start sentences about her patients and then trail off, worry creasing her forehead. And late at night, when Clara was asleep and they sat by the fire talking in low voices, Evelyn would voice the fears that plagued her. "What if I'm being selfish?" she asked on the 4th night after the proposal. "I have patients in town who depend on me. Mrs. Henderson with her rheumatism, the Peterson children who always seem to catch every illness that passes through, old Mr. Walsh with his heart condition. What happens to them if I just abandon my practice?" Jasper had been expecting this conversation, had been preparing for it. "You're not abandoning anyone. You'll still be a healer. You'll just be healing different people, or the same people, in a different way." "But what if there's an emergency and I'm too far away? What if someone dies because I chose my own happiness over my responsibility?" Her hands twisted in her lap, betraying her agitation. "Then that's a tragedy, but it's not your fault." Jasper moved to kneel in front of her chair, taking her restless hands in his. "Evelyn, you can't save everyone. You can't be in two places at once. And you can't sacrifice your entire life out of fear that someone might need you. I know that logically, but the guilt is the price of caring deeply about your calling. I understand that." He squeezed her hands gently. "But there are people here who need you too. Homesteaders scattered across this territory who never see a doctor or healer because they're too far from town. Children like Clara who get sick and have no one to turn to. You could do just as much good here as you do in town. Maybe more, because you'd be reaching people who currently have no options. Evelyn's expression was torn, caught between competing loyalties. I need to go back, at least once. I need to tell people myself, arrange for another healer to take over my practice, make sure everyone will be cared for. I can't just disappear. I know, and I'm not asking you to. Jasper stood, pulling her up with him. The road should be clear enough for travel in another day or two. When you're ready, you'll ride to town, settle your affairs, and come back. I'll be here waiting. And if I get to town and realize I've made a terrible mistake, if I realize I can't actually leave my life there, the fear in her voice was real, raw. Then you tell me, and we figure out what comes next. Jasper's voice was steady, despite the fear her words sparked in his chest. I'm not going to trap you here, Evelyn. This has to be your choice, freely made. If you decide you can't do this, I'll understand. It'll hurt like hell, but I'll understand. She searched his face, looking for something. You mean that? You'd really let me go if I asked. I love you. That means I want you happy more than I want you here against your will. He managed a weak smile. Though I'm going to hope like hell that being here makes you happy enough to stay. Evelyn rose on her toes and kissed him, slow and sweet and full of promise. I do love you, she whispered against his lips. That's the one thing that I'm completely certain of. Everything else is just logistics and fear. Then we'll deal with the logistics, and we'll face the fear together. 2 days later, the road to town was clear enough for travel. Evelyn prepared to leave with a mixture of determination and trepidation that Jasper could feel radiating off her in waves. Clara clung to her skirts, making Evelyn promise over and over that she'd come back. I'll be back in 3 days, Evelyn assured her, kneeling to be at the child's eye level. 4 at most. I just need to take care of some important things in town, and then I'll come home. You promise? You're not just saying that? I promise on my grandmother's memory. Evelyn's voice was solemn, and that's the most sacred promise I can make. I'll come back, Clara. This is my home now. Jasper helped Evelyn prepare Daisy for the journey, checking the mare's tack and making sure Evelyn had enough supplies for the ride. The morning was cold but clear, the kind of diamond-bright winter day that made everything look sharp-edged and possible. You'll be all right? Evelyn asked as she mounted, looking down at Jasper with concern. You and Clara? We'll be fine. We've been managing on our own for 6 years. We can handle 3 more days. But even as he said it, Jasper felt the wrongness of it. They'd been managing, yes, but now that he knew what it felt like to have help, to have partnership, to have love, going back to just managing felt like a defeat. I'll miss you, Evelyn said softly. Both of you. Every mile of this ride. Then ride fast and come back faster. Jasper reached up to touch her boot, needing the connection. And Evelyn, whatever you decide in town, just make sure it's what you really want. Not what you think you should want, not what other people expect. What you want. She nodded, her eyes bright with emotion, and then she was riding away. Jasper stood with his arm around Clara, watching until Evelyn disappeared over the rise. The cabin felt emptier already, like something vital had been taken from it. The next 3 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jasper threw himself into work, repairing storm damage, checking fence lines, anything to keep his mind occupied. But at night, lying alone in the loft, he couldn't stop worrying. What if Evelyn got to town and remembered all the reasons why staying made sense? What if her patients begged her not to leave? What if she realized that a life with a rancher and his daughter couldn't compete with the independence and purpose she'd built for herself? Clara, sensing his worry, became unusually clingy. She asked constantly when Evelyn would be back, whether she'd really keep her promise, what would happen if she changed her mind. Jasper did his best to reassure her, but his own doubts made the words ring hollow. On the 4th morning, Jasper woke before dawn with a knot of anxiety in his stomach. 4 days. Evelyn had said 3 or 4 days. If she didn't return today, he heard hoofbeats. For a moment, he thought he was imagining it, that his desperate hope had conjured the sound from nothing. But no. There it was again, clear and unmistakable, a horse approaching at a steady trot. Jasper was out of bed and down the ladder in seconds, not bothering with his boots as he rushed to the door and flung it open. Dawn was just breaking, painting the snow-covered prairie in shades of pink and gold. And there, riding toward the cabin with the sunrise at her back, was Evelyn. She was leading a second horse, a sturdy gelding loaded with what looked like all her worldly possessions packed into bags and bundles. When she saw Jasper standing in the doorway, she urged Daisy into a canter. Jasper met her in the yard, and before she could even dismount properly, he was reaching up to help her down, pulling her into his arms the moment her feet hit the ground. "You came back," he breathed into her hair. "You actually came back." "Did you doubt I would?" Her voice was muffled against his chest. "Every second of the past 4 days." He pulled back enough to look at her face, searching for signs of regret or hesitation. Instead, he saw only determination and a bone-deep weariness. "I'm sorry I'm late. There was so much to arrange, and Sheriff Morrison wanted to throw me a going-away party at the saloon, and Mrs. Henderson cried for an hour when I told her I was leaving." Evelyn's words tumbled over each other. "But I did it. I found another healer willing to take over my practice, a young man fresh from medical school back east who'll actually probably be better for the town than I was. I packed everything I own. I said my goodbyes. And I came home." "Home," Jasper repeated, testing the word. "You really think of this place as home now?" "I think of anywhere you and Clara are as home." Evelyn's smile was tired but genuine. "The place doesn't matter. The people do." "Papa?" Clara's voice came from the doorway, thick with sleep. "Is that Miss Evelyn? You came back." She flew across the yard in her nightgown and bare feet, apparently not noticing the cold at all in her excitement. Evelyn caught her, swinging her up despite Clara's increasing size. "Of course I came back, sweetheart. I promised, didn't I?" "I knew you would. Papa was worried, but I knew." Clara wrapped her arms around Evelyn's neck in a stranglehold. "Don't ever leave again. Not ever." "Well, I might have to leave occasionally to see patients or go to town for supplies," Evelyn started, but Clara cut her off. "That's different. That's just leaving and coming back. I mean, don't leave forever. Don't go away like Mama did." The words struck all three of them silent. Jasper reached out to touch his daughter's back, feeling the small body trembling. "Clara, honey," Evelyn's voice was gentle. "Your mama didn't choose to leave you. She would have stayed if she could have." "I know, but she's still gone, and I was scared you'd be gone too." "I'm not going anywhere." Evelyn's arms tightened around Clara. "I'm going to be here when you wake up in the morning and when you go to sleep at night. I'm going to teach you about healing and help you with your lessons and scold you when you don't eat your vegetables. I'm going to be your mother in every way that matters, if you'll let me." Clara pulled back to look at Evelyn's face, her eyes searching. "You mean it? You'll really be my mama?" "I'll really be your mama as soon as your papa and I get married, which I'm hoping will be very soon because I'm tired of waiting." Jasper felt his heart skip. "How soon are we talking?" "How's Saturday?" Evelyn set Clara down and turned to face him. "I talked to Reverend Matthews while I was in town. He's willing to ride out here this weekend to perform the ceremony. Unless you want something bigger, more formal, Saturday's perfect." Jasper couldn't stop grinning. "Saturday's more than perfect. I'd marry you today if we could arrange it." "Can I be a flower girl?" Clara was bouncing on her toes again, her earlier tears forgotten. "And wear a pretty dress? And throw petals? In February in Wyoming?" Evelyn laughed. "We'll have to get creative about the flowers. But yes, absolutely you can be a flower girl. In fact, you're going to be the most important person at the wedding, besides your papa and me." They spent the rest of that day unloading Evelyn's belongings and finding places for them in the cabin. It was strange, wonderful, to see her possessions mingling with his, her medical books on the shelf next to his farming almanacs, her clothes hanging beside his in the wardrobe they'd have to share, her herbs and tinctures taking over half the kitchen. The cabin was crowded now, almost too full, but it finally felt complete. That night, after Clara had gone to bed, Jasper and Evelyn sat by the fire making plans. "I've been thinking about the clinic idea," Evelyn said, her fingers intertwined with his. "The old shed behind the barn. It's not being used for anything, is it? Just storage for equipment I don't need. Why? It's big enough that we could convert it. Add a stove for heat, put in a bed for patients who need to stay overnight, shelves for medicine and supplies. We could turn it into a proper clinic. Then homesteaders in the area would have somewhere to come when they need help. Jasper turned the idea over in his mind, already seeing the possibilities. We'd need to insulate it better, add windows for light, build proper shelving. But it's doable? You think it could work? I think it's brilliant. He squeezed her hand. We could start work on it as soon as the weather breaks properly. By summer, you could have a full practice right here. Evelyn's face lit up with excitement. I could still ride to town once a week to check on patients there, at least for a while, until the new healer gets fully established. And then I'd be here the rest of the time, seeing people locally. It's perfect. It's exactly what I wanted but didn't know how to ask for. You don't have to do this alone, you know. Jasper brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. Building the clinic, running the practice, all of it. I'll help. We're partners now, in everything. Partners, Evelyn repeated, smiling. I like the sound of that. The days until Saturday passed in a blur of preparation. Evelyn sewed a new dress for herself from fabric she'd brought from town. Nothing fancy, just a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Clara helped, learning to make small stitches under Evelyn's patient instruction. Jasper cleaned and aired out the cabin until it gleamed, fixed a leak in the roof he'd been ignoring, even took a razor to his beard and trimmed it into something respectable. Word spread quickly among the scattered homesteads. Apparently Sheriff Morrison had wasted no time telling everyone in town about the healer marrying the widowed rancher, and the news had rippled out across the territory like a stone dropped in still water. By Friday evening, 3 neighboring families had ridden over to congratulate them and promised to attend the wedding. I thought we were keeping this small, Jasper said, watching yet another wagon pull up to the cabin. In Wyoming territory, this is small. Evelyn laughed, going to greet the Johnsons, a family with 4 children who lived 10 miles south. Besides, people are happy for us. Let them celebrate. Saturday dawned cold but clear, with a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Jasper woke early, nerves and excitement making sleep impossible. Today he was getting married. Today he was choosing to love again, to build a future, to believe that happiness was possible even after loss. The thought of Sarah crossed his mind, as it often did. But this time, instead of guilt, he felt something softer. A sense of her blessing, maybe, or just the understanding that she'd want this for him. She'd want Clara to have a mother, want him to have a partner, want their family to be whole again. Loving Evelyn didn't diminish what he'd felt for Sarah. It just meant his heart had room for both, for honoring the past and embracing the future. Reverend Matthews arrived mid-morning, a cheerful man in his 50s who'd made the long ride from town without complaint. He set up in the cabin's main room while people continued to arrive. The Johnsons, the Peterson family, the Hendersons, even old Mr. Walsh, who probably shouldn't have made the journey but insisted on coming anyway. By noon, the small cabin was packed with people, and more stood outside in the yard, bundled against the cold. Clara was nearly beside herself with excitement, wearing a dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped alter to fit her. She'd woven dried grasses and evergreen sprigs into a crown for her hair, and she carried a small basket that would serve as her flower basket, even though there were no flowers to be had this time of year. Jasper stood at the front of the room in his best clothes, a suit he hadn't worn since Sarah's funeral, now brushed clean and pressed. His hands shook slightly as he waited, and Jake Peterson, standing beside him as unofficial best man, clapped him on the shoulder. Nervous? Jake asked quietly. Terrified, Jasper admitted. What if I mess this up? What if I'm not a good enough husband? What if... You'll be fine. Jake's voice was firm. That woman rode through a blizzard for your daughter and chose to leave her whole life behind to be with you. She's not doing that because she has doubts. So stop doubting yourself. Before Jasper could respond, someone near the door said, She's coming, and the room fell silent. Clara walked in first, scattering her evergreen sprigs with solemn concentration, and then Evelyn appeared in the doorway, and Jasper's breath caught. She'd done something to her hair, pinning it up in a way that showed off her face. The blue dress fit her perfectly, simple but elegant. She wore no jewelry except for a small locket that Jasper knew held a picture of her grandmother. And she was smiling, a smile so bright and full of joy that it transformed her entire face. She walked toward him through the crowd of well-wishers, her eyes never leaving his. When she reached him and took his hands, Jasper felt something in his chest expand, like his heart was making room for all this happiness. You look beautiful, he whispered. You clean up pretty well yourself, she whispered back, and he could hear the laughter in her voice, the joy barely contained. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Jasper heard the words, "Dearly beloved, joining together, holy matrimony," but they seemed to come from very far away. His entire focus was on Evelyn, on the way her hands trembled slightly in his, on the tears gathering in her eyes, on the absolute rightness of this moment. When it came time for vows, Jasper had planned to use the traditional words. But standing there, looking at this remarkable woman who'd turned his life around in the space of a week, the planned words felt insufficient. "Evelyn," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "a week ago, I was a man who'd given up on everything except survival. I'd forgotten what it meant to hope, to dream, to want anything beyond just making it through another day. And then you rode into my life in the middle of a blizzard, and you reminded me what it means to live. You saved my daughter's life, and then you saved mine in a completely different way. I promise to love you, to support your calling, to be your partner in all things. I promise to never take for granted the gift of your presence in my life. And I promise that every day I'll work to deserve the love you're giving me." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Evelyn was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face as she smiled. "Jasper," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I came west looking for freedom, for purpose, for a place where I could be fully myself. I found all of that, but I was still lonely. I'd convinced myself that my calling was enough, that I didn't need anything else. And then I met you and Clara, and I realized I'd been lying to myself. I need you. I need this. I need the challenge of building a life together, of being part of a family, of loving and being loved. I promise to be a good wife, a good mother to Clara, and a good partner in all our endeavors. I promise to bring all of myself to this marriage, my strength, my stubbornness, my healing gifts, even my doubts and fears. And I promise that no matter what challenges we face, we'll face them together." Reverend Matthews was smiling too, clearly moved. "I think we can dispense with the rest of the traditional vows. Jasper Hale, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do. More than anything." "And Evelyn Carr, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me and in the presence of these witnesses, I pronounce you husband and wife. Jasper, you may kiss your bride." Jasper pulled Evelyn close and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they had an audience, not caring about anything except the feeling of her in his arms, and the knowledge that she was his now, and he was hers, and they had a whole future stretching ahead of them. The cabin erupted in cheers and applause. Clara launched herself at them both, wrapping her arms around their legs. "You're married! You're really married! I have a mama!" Evelyn bent down to scoop Clara up, holding her between herself and Jasper. "You have a mama," she confirmed, kissing Clara's forehead, "forever and always." The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Someone had brought a fiddle and started playing, and soon people were dancing in the limited space of the cabin and spilling out into the yard. Mrs. Henderson had somehow managed to produce a cake, small and simple, but sweet and welcome. People offered toasts and congratulations, told stories about Jasper and Sarah and Evelyn, welcomed Evelyn officially into the community. As the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink, Jasper found himself standing outside with Evelyn, watching Clara play with the Peterson children in the yard. "Happy?" he asked, pulling his new wife close against the cold. "Happier than I knew I could be," Evelyn admitted, leaning into him. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to turn out to be a dream. But it's real, isn't it? We really did this. We really did." Jasper kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, lavender and wood smoke, and something uniquely Evelyn. "No regrets?" "None." She turned in his arms to face him. "Well, maybe one small regret." His heart clenched. "What?" "That we didn't do this sooner." She grinned, and he realized she was teasing. "I could have been sleeping in a real bed instead of the loft for the past week." Jasper laughed, relief making him almost giddy. "Well, Mrs. Hale, I think we can rectify that situation starting tonight." "Mrs. Hale," Evelyn repeated, testing the name. "Evelyn Hale. I like it." Though I might keep using car professionally, people know me as Healer Car. Use whatever name makes you happy. You're still mine either way." They stood together as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, watching their daughter play and their neighbors celebrate. Eventually, people began to leave, heading home before it got too late and too cold. The Hendersons invited Clara to spend the night with them, giving the newlyweds some privacy, and Clara went happily chattering about all the fun she'd have with the Henderson children. Finally, Jasper and Evelyn were alone in the cabin. It felt strange and wonderful, knowing that this wasn't temporary, that Evelyn wouldn't be leaving in the morning, that this was their life now. "I should check the fire," Jasper said, suddenly nervous, "and make sure the horses are settled for the night. And, Jasper," Evelyn's hand on his arm stopped him. "Everything can wait. Come to bed. Our bed." So he did. They banked the fire and locked the door and climbed into the bed that would be theirs from now on. And for the first time in 6 years, Jasper didn't feel the hollow ache of loneliness as he drifted off to sleep. Instead, he felt complete. The winter gave way slowly to spring, and with it came change. True to their plans, Jasper and Evelyn converted the old shed into a clinic. It took months of work, insulating, building shelves, installing a proper stove, adding windows to let in light. But by the time the prairie grass turned green and wildflowers dotted the hills, the clinic was ready. Word spread that there was a healer available in the western part of the territory, and people began to come. Homesteaders who'd been making do without medical care, mothers with sick children, men injured in ranch accidents. Evelyn treated them all with the same competence and compassion she'd shown Clara that first night, and Jasper watched with pride as his wife built something remarkable. Clara thrived under Evelyn's care. She learned about herbs and healing, yes, but more importantly, she learned what it meant to be part of a whole family. She had a mother who braided her hair and taught her to sew and read her stories at bedtime. She had a father who wasn't half dead from exhaustion and grief. She had a home full of laughter and love instead of just grim survival. One evening in July, as fireflies danced across the prairie and the air was heavy with the scent of wildflowers, Evelyn asked Jasper to join her on the porch. Clara was already asleep, worn out from a day of helping in the garden. "I have something to tell you," Evelyn said, and there was something in her voice that made Jasper's pulse quicken. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. In fact, everything is very, very right." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, flat and showing no sign of change yet. "By spring, you're going to have another mouth to feed." For a moment, Jasper couldn't process the words. Then understanding crashed over him like a wave. We're having a baby." Evelyn's smile was radiant. "I'm about 2 months along, I think. I wasn't sure at first, but now I am. Are you happy?" Happy seemed too small a word for what Jasper felt. Joy, yes, excitement, but also a fierce protective love for this child he hadn't even met yet. A child born not of tragedy, but of love. A child who would grow up knowing both parents, seeing what a marriage built on partnership and respect looked like. His voice cracked. "I'm beyond happy. I'm overwhelmed. I'm terrified. I'm all of it at once." "Me too." Evelyn leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her. "I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong, all the ways—" "Don't." Jasper's arms tightened. "Don't borrow trouble. We'll face whatever comes, but right now, in this moment, just let yourself be happy." So they sat together on the porch as darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead, countless diamonds scattered across black velvet. Jasper thought about the journey that had brought them here, from desperation and grief to hope and love. He thought about the blizzard that had seemed like a curse, but turned out to be a blessing. He thought about the woman who'd ridden through that storm and changed everything. "Do you remember," he said quietly, "that first night when I almost didn't let you in? I remember you pointing a rifle at me through the door." Evelyn's voice held amusement. "Very romantic. I was ready to tell you to leave, to handle everything myself like I always had. And if I'd done that, but you didn't. You opened the door. You let me help. You took the risk." Evelyn turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "That's what love is, isn't it? Opening the door when everything in you wants to keep it closed. Trusting someone when you've been hurt before. Believing that maybe, just maybe, This time things will be different. And are they? Different? They're better than different. They're right. She kissed him softly. We're right, Jasper. You, me, Clara, this baby we're going to have. We're exactly what we're all supposed to be. Inside the cabin, a lamp still burned, casting warm light through the windows. Jasper could see the shadows of all the small changes Evelyn had made. Curtains on the windows, herbs hanging to dry, books on the shelves, all the little touches that turned a house into a home. Beyond the cabin, the clinic stood dark but ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. And all around them, the prairie stretched out in every direction, wild and beautiful and full of possibility. The cowboy who'd once sat hungry and hopeless beside his dying child had found everything he'd thought was lost forever. He'd found hope. He'd found help. He'd found healing. And most importantly, he'd found love. Not as a replacement for what he'd lost, but as something new and precious in its own right. When Evelyn had come riding through that blizzard, she'd brought more than medicine and herbs and practical healing knowledge. She'd brought the possibility of a future worth living, the courage to open a heart long closed, the reminder that life, real, full, joyful life, was still possible even after the deepest loss. And now, sitting on his porch with his wife's hand in his and a child growing in her belly and his daughter sleeping peacefully inside and the whole wide sky blazing with stars overhead, Jasper Hale understood something fundamental about grace. It came when you least expected it, in forms you didn't recognize, during storms you thought would destroy you. It came in the shape of a woman with dark hair and determined eyes, riding through snow with medicine in her bag and love in her heart. It came. And if you were brave enough to open the door, it changed everything. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and growing things. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The fire inside the cabin crackled softly, and Jasper Hale, once broken and now whole, held his wife close and knew that he was home. Not the cabin, not the land, not any physical place, but here, in this moment, with this woman, building this life together. That was home. That was everything. That was the healing he'd needed without knowing he needed it. The love he'd thought he'd never find again. The future he'd stopped believing in. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.